In 2021, the world of people changed forever. In the capital of the Czech Republic, giant magic circles flashed in the sky, and the first tower of enormous height appeared from them. The population was shocked. No one could understand what was happening. Many were panicked and shouted about the apocalypse, while others simply froze, fearing the unknown. A year later, all human cities were destroyed, and only towers remained, which began to appear in other parts of the world. People who managed to survive began to head to them in the hope of salvation. A bright, spacious, and fertile tower. It seemed to be the only way of salvation for humanity. The tower that appeared in Seoul was not a curse. For Koreans, the tower became a whole new world. And none of them cried on the ruins of the old one. Everyone was obsessed with only one thing: the top of the tower. Everyone began to climb the mountain fanatically. Those who were able to climb the highest basked in wealth and glory for the rest of their lives. These people achieved such greatness that ordinary people could not even dream of. They were engraved on the top of the tower as Constellations. They were the closest to revealing the secrets of the tower, the support for the next generations. Thus, 36 years passed. The conquest of Seoul Tower continued. The young group got stuck on one of the floors and was almost completely destroyed. Only one guy remained, who was also quite badly beaten. He looked at the explosion, which he thought was supposed to destroy the enemy who had killed his group. Kneeling on his knees from exhaustion, the guy thought. The team that died on the floor was the best reconnaissance unit in the history of Seoul Tower. And they died on the 89th floor. Was this the limit of humanity? The boy's gaze shifted to the girl who had died right before his eyes. He began to address the deceased, calling her the Platinum Monarch. The survivor did not understand why the young girl had sacrificed her life to save him. It made no sense. His thoughts were interrupted by a magical beast that dispelled the cloud left by the explosion. The creature looked like a giant cobra with dragon wings and impenetrable scales. The boy was surprised that the cobra had survived so many attacks and began to complain that the Constellations had left him behind. But when he looked at the dead girl again, he realized that regrets could not change anything. It was the end. So we have to fight to the last. The cobra aggressively opened its mouth for a finishing attack. But the guy was ready. He would not give up so easily. He raised his weapon and in a frantic battle cry rushed at the cobra. A few seconds later, his eyes went completely white. The guy finished his strike in some unknown place, where someone had moved him. Surprised, he noticed two silhouettes communicating with each other in front of him. The first thought that came to him was that he had been kidnapped by invaders from another tower. In shock, he tried to attack them. But the two long-haired silhouettes easily dodged his attacks and, while talking to each other, analyzed the alien in detail. The boy continued his senseless attacks until he was brought to consciousness by a strong punch in the stomach. One of the silhouettes started kicking him, saying he was pathetic. The second silhouette asked him to stop the beating. While the guy was being kicked, he was wondering how this could have happened. Who were these people, and where did the snake go? The silhouette began to reproach him for only being able to climb to the 89th floor. It was too low. But how did he know what happened on that floor? The guy was sure that there were no survivors there. He was told once again that he was of no use and was hit in the face with a boot. After that, from the dialogue of the silhouettes, the guy learned that there was a way out of the situation with the cobra. It was necessary to find the seal left by the Platinum Monarch, and then the magical beast would die. But instead, the boy decided to just die. One of the silhouettes was angry with him for that. Realizing that his team could have been saved, the guy froze in shock. And then, in a panicked scream, he asked the silhouettes again who they were and how they knew everything. The silhouettes realized that the cobra's death had not passed without a trace and put a potion in his eyes. The boy's eyes began to dawn, and he saw that the silhouettes were people. Moreover, they were other lives of the hero that he had lived in the past. So he realized that he had the ability to be reborn, but each time his memory was erased. No matter how far he managed to conquer the tower, after death he would become his powerless 20-year-old self again. He could not understand the meaning of this ability. His past lives began to tell him about themselves. One of them had the title of Master in the Circle Guild and received the title of One from the Tower. The other was a member of the Alchemists Guild and received the call sign Dynamite from the Tower. The One and the Dynamite. These names meant nothing to the boy. He heard them for the first time. The conversation revealed that the guy had quite a few past lives, up to about 10. But only the One and Dynamite were interested in their current life. They explained that other attempts after death lead to the hero's sub-identity, from which there is no way out. This is how the guy realized where he was, and how he got here. The only One and Dynamite wanted their next life to reach the level of a constellation and retain their memory in order to look after the next lives. Now it became clear why the only One was angry with the guy. If only he had been a little smarter. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud sound. The boy asked the One what was going on, but there was nothing to explain. The next life begins. Baek Homan woke up from a strange dream and jumped off the ground. His friend woke him up, saying that it was already dawn, and there was no time to sleep anymore because they were in an emergency. Baek Homan told about his dream, in which he was talking to a great sorcerer and other people. The boy looked at his hand, and was surprised to see the absence of the magic seal that he had in other lives. But in this life, it was not there yet, so his friend thought that Baek Homan had not fully awakened. Another member of the group called out to them, and told them to hurry up and go to him, threatening them with death if they didn't. The boys quickly followed the order, and Baek Homan gradually forgot his night vision. Reincarnation threw the hero to the 4th floor of Seoul Tower. It was the level of extras, where ordinary people could live. Baek Homan is not a hunter, a constellation, or a member of a research team. He is just an ordinary guy working for a loan shark. This is his new life, with an unknown ending. The group continued on the 4th floor. Baek Homan kept going over the dream he had almost forgotten. But he didn't have much time to think, because he was on a dangerous mission. He had to catch the Graver, which Baek Homan did not want to do. Gravers were hunters in the Circle Guild. This guild was famous for its ability to create, impose, and remove seals. Therefore, being afraid for their abilities, sorcerers did not want to get involved with them in order not to lose their abilities. This work was to be done by people like Baek Homan. In order to avoid persecution, Graver created magical parasites at the location. One of them injured a member of the group, who had to have his arm cut off in front of Baek Homan. The comrades dragged the victim back to their lair. The leader reiterated that we should not let our guard down, because gravekeepers are much stronger than ordinary people. If someone allows a graver to escape, they will not have a pleasant fate. Realizing this, the group continued their search. Baek Homan wondered what exactly the graver they were looking for had done. Most likely, he crossed the path of the Elder. The Elder was a moneylender who worked for the city's ruler. The Spider was an apt nickname for the head of a criminal organization, and the leaders of his gang were called Spider Legs. The Elder was one of the Spider's legs. He took Baek Homan when he was 10 to his orphanage. Thanks to him, Baek Homan has such a lousy life. It's unlikely that the reason for the chase was money, because engravers make a lot of money creating seals. It was something else. From thinking about the motives behind their actions, Baek Homan and his friend turned to discussing the revenge of the Circle Guild. Could the other engravers, upon learning of their actions, apply seals such that the road to the constellations would be closed to them? The new seals immediately give you some skills and a chance to start life as a hunter. Constellations can choose and train their successors through seals. But if the constellations don't care about you or hate you, it's even worse than not having a seal. Baek Homan wanted to meet with this engraver less and less. More than 10 people in their group had already been hurt by him. He has no seal, and if he meets the engraver, he can forget about his dream of becoming a hunter. Suddenly, Baek Homan's comrade screamed loudly. He saw the engraver hiding in the bushes. The engraver said he was going to kill them both. Baek Homan picked up his weapon and fought for his life. But the engraver grabbed the knife by the blade and turned it into liquid. Baek Homan could not believe it. The engraver threw the pieces of his knife at Baek Homan. Baek Homan screamed in pain. His friend, calling the engraver a bastard, kicked him with all his might. The steel that the engraver had thrown at him stuck to Baek Homan's hand. The comrade defeated the engraver and asked for help in tying him up. In a fit of anger, Baek Homan called the engraver names and rushed to help his friend with the arrest. The engraver asked to be released, but no one was going to do it. The comrades noticed that the engraver's bag was full of gold coins. One gold coin was worth 114 million won. And this was the minimum price to get the seal. Baek Homan would not have been able to earn that much in 10 years from this job. His friend started counting the money in his bag. Baek Homan did not want to help him because the money belonged to the elder. He realized that if even a coin went missing, they would be in serious trouble. But his friend seemed to become obsessed with the sight of money. Baek Homan tried to talk him out of it, worried for both their lives. But when Baek Homan's friend took a closer look, he noticed that these were not ordinary gold coins. The ordinary ones had a tower carved into them, while the ones in the engraver's bag had a constellation sign. Baek Homan was surprised. Suddenly, he got a headache, and the engraver, noticing this, broke out of his rapture and set fire to Baek Homan's hand. Hearing this, the comrade who held the money looked back. At this point, the engraver was already holding Baek Homan's hand tightly, mockingly saying that he would now make them a free print. The engraver wanted to make bad seals for the boys, and thus take revenge by destroying their dreams. Baek Homan asked him to stop, but it was too late. Baek Homan's friend came around the engraver from behind and hit him hard on the head with a stone, after which he lost consciousness. The comrade asked if Baek Homan was okay. But he was not all right. He was in a panic. A seal is given to a person once for life. And now, looking at this poorly made seal, Baek Homan's only hope was that this seal would give him at least a slightly useful ability. A window popped up in front of his eyes, as if in a computer game, approving the receipt of the seal and informing him of the new ability. In this life, Baek Homan received a skill called memory. The window said that this skill helps solve problems in the present by using experiences from the past. Baek Homan wasn't thrilled, but suddenly he got a headache again. At this time, his past lives began to feel that the space they were in was shaking incredibly strongly. The last of the deceased asked the one and the Dynamite if this had ever happened before. But Dynamite assured him that this was the first time this had happened to anyone, and he had no idea what was going on. Then Dynamite noticed that the one began to disappear. The one started to say his guess about what was happening, but he didn't have time to finish the sentence. The memory skill was activated. The window in front of Baek Homan showed him whose memory he had activated and continued to display the following information. Experience. Broadcasting a seal with impure materials. Similarity of experience. 98%. Baek Homan was overcome with a strange feeling. Information that was unknown to him before was rapidly entering his head. It seemed to him that he was able to correct his imperfect seal. His friend was frightened, told him not to touch his hand, and ran to find help. But Baek Homan was more confident than anyone else and firmly and clearly decided to use his skill. The one, observing Baek Homan in spirit form, saw his seal and said that only he could fix this. The hands of the one were blessed. He can make gold out of anything. Even though he knew that Baek Homan couldn't hear him, the one asked him to believe in him, as well as in himself. A few seconds later, Baek Homin's hand already had a special seal on it that began to glow. The magic circle on the top of the tower was activated, and every adventurer noticed it. No one realized what was happening, but the light went out pretty quickly. Baek Homin noticed that he was able to fix the seal, but he did not understand how exactly it happened. The game window popped up in front of his eyes again. The synchronization rate with the constellation Een has been significantly increased. Baek Homin asked himself what Een was. Then he fainted from exhaustion. At this time, the One himself returned to the familiar world of the subconscious, where his other two past lives were already waiting for him. They told the One how he had disappeared and reappeared. The only One told them about the 4th level skill that Baek Homin had gained. The hunter, who had died from a cobra, tried to reassure the others and said that it was only his first skill. But Dynamite was confused by something else. No one in history had ever lived longer than a month with a level 4 skill. They were either killed or died of various diseases. There was no exception to the rule. Suddenly, the One screamed at the entire chamber world of the subconscious. The other two began to calm him down again, saying that if Baek Homin died soon, it wouldn't be long before he was reborn again. But the One laughed in their faces and said that Baek Homin would not die. This life was their hope. For a second, it seemed that the One had lost his mind, but he explained his joy. Baek Homin had gained an SSS level skill. No one knows what skills are needed to reach the top of the tower. Even with special skins, there is no guarantee. But the memory skill stands out even among the special ones. The very skill that the One pinned all his hopes on. No one was able to use Baek Homin's seal under normal circumstances, but thanks to the One and the memory skill, it became possible. It was with the help of the memory skill that the One was summoned. Now all three of them realized how powerful the memory skill was. For this meant a real rebirth. But it was too early to rejoice. No one had ever lived longer than a week with such a strong skill. But even so, now the past lives had every chance of coming back to life. If Baek Homin used his skill effectively, they could take down the tower. Baek Homin woke up with a sharp pain in his arm. It was his seal that was hurting. Baek Homin thought back to the events and became sad again. He wanted to become a hunter with at least level 3 skills. In his mind, the 4th level was just garbage. He never understood how his skill worked. He thought that it would just be good to remember everything. But he tried to think more positively. In any case, his body became much stronger after receiving the seal. This meant that he would become even stronger in the future. If he tried hard enough, he would be able to become a hunter. And when that happens, he will definitely get out of these poor neighborhoods. 2 men came into his tent. One of them was the leader of the group with whom Baek Homin was looking for the engraver, and the other was the elder himself. But why was one of the spider's legs in his tent? Baek Homin immediately began to say that he had not touched the gang's gold. But the elder assured him that this was not the case, and ordered the leader of the group to check Baek Homin. The leader asked him to show his hand. Baek Homin was afraid, but the elder reassured him again and said that he was there to welcome him. Baek Homin caught Graver. But not alone, but with his friend Hyunsung. The boy told the elder that he was just lucky. The bandit said that the engraver's skull was crushed and he died, and that Baek Homin returned the stolen gold. These gold coins are the initial currency that the Platinum Monarch was going to introduce in the near future. They were scheduled to be launched next month, but the engraver had already managed to counterfeit them. Baek Homin wondered why the elder was telling this to a miserable person like him. The reason was that he now had a copy of the coin imprinted on his hand. The engraver had struck it off on purpose. The elder asked him to keep it a secret in any way possible. He also asked Baek Homin to tell him the truth about his seal and skill, promising him a good job and a salary. Baek Homin knew perfectly well that he shouldn't tell about his skill. This way you reveal your weaknesses. But he had no choice. and there was no point in lying. He told the elder about the memory. The elder asked him again if he was lying. He said that Baek Homin would now be his direct subordinate, and he had better tell him what his skill was. Baek Homin repeated the same thing. Satrashina did not believe him. He said he needed a true serum. Baek Homin panicked and kept repeating his skill, but they were not listening. They injected the serum into his neck. Baek Homin blacked out. When he woke up, he noticed a set of torture tools. A dialogue was going on outside his tent. Graver confirmed the information about Baek Homin's skill. But where was the white glow coming from? The gang was sure that it was the boy's fault. No one believed Baek Homin. The elder's boss and the people from the guild were worried. The elder ordered to find out what was planned to be done with the coins by any means necessary, even through torture. Baek Homin realized that he had to run away. The elder could kill him. But how to get out of here? And then an idea came to him. To use his new skill. It couldn't hurt to try. This time he summoned dynamite. The game window said, "Experience, restriction of freedom, imprisonment, escape. Similarity of experience, 21%. Baek Homin turned his eyes to the vials of substances. To his surprise, he knew their contents and properties. He took some of the substances and began to mix them. Once again, knowledge he had not had before entered his mind. Baek Homin felt possessed. Outside the tent, the elder, and he heard a strange sound coming from inside. When they entered the tent, Baek Homin was no longer there. There was only a strange odor. Baek Homin had made poison gas and filled the tent with it. The elder's bandits rushed to look for Baek Homin. The elder himself was furious. He went all the way to the 4th floor to catch the engraver. Now he had to catch Baek Homin as well. Ordinary people are only allowed to enter the 4th floor. If he gets to the 5th floor, he will not be caught. Then the elder decided. If Baek Homin has a reason to do this, he can do it. When Baek Homin had his seal made, the whole tower was covered with light and a Suzuri sign that no one had ever seen before. It was necessary to investigate his seal, even at the cost of his life. But the elder's plans were thwarted by a blade to his throat. It was Baek Homin who wanted to talk. His plans included death on the 4th floor. Baek Homin held his knife to the elder's throat. The man was surprised that Baek Homin did not run away, and he did not understand how the boy managed to survive in the tent with poison gas. The fact was that Baek Homin had made an antidote for himself in addition to the poison. Also, if you dig a hole and cover your head with earth, you can survive for about half an hour due to the air pocket. Baek Homin was still under the influence of the truth, so he told the elder his plan. There was not much time for their conversation. Baek Homin tied the elder to a tree and told him that he had thought about learning to use the seal and still serve the gang, but since the situation was the way it was, he wanted to get the money that was promised to him. The elder said that the life of a person with a seal was much more valuable than that little bit of money. But Baek Homin wanted to take every penny on principle. He was forced to rummage through garbage dumps, rob vendors, and take dubious medicines. To summarize, the elder owed Baek Homin 175 million won. But the elder did not agree with this. He said that Baek Homin should have deducted the money for nursing, blood, and food. He considered eating rotten oatmeal in an emergency orphanage to be a mockery, not a favor. Baek Homin threatened the elder with death if he did not pay the debt. But the elder suspected that Baek Homin was bluffing because he had never killed anyone before. Baek Homin decided to search his prisoner. He found a silver coin worth 10 million won. This did not cover even 10% of the amount. So Baek Homin promised to return in the future for the rest. The elder also informed Baek Homin of his intention to take revenge, and Baek Homin hit the man on the head and he passed out. A dilemma arose in Baek Homin's mind. The best solution would be to kill the elder to save himself. He decided to make a stab with his knife, but was interrupted by an arrow that wounded his leg. It was the elder's men who found the two of them. Baek Homan ran away. When Baek Homan broke away from the pursuit, he was exhausted. He could not feel his leg. Most likely, the arrow was poisoned. He rushed to take the medicine he had taken out of his pocket. The bandit who caught up with Baek Homan said that he should have applied the antidote to the wound, because it would have worked faster. And by the time the antidote worked from the inside, he would have been killed. The bandit started to attack with a knife. But Baek Homan stabbed his enemy in the stomach with a swift jerk. It turned out that the guy had taken a stimulant, not an antidote, to make his body move. Baek Homan knocked the bandit out with a right punch. His past lives were pleased with Baek Homan's actions. After all, he had once reached the level of a constellation, which means he can definitely overcome an amateur hunter. The stimulant made with dynamite helped a lot, but only the guy's own talent allowed him to realize it 100%. The only one said it was a good start. The last of the three said that Baek Homan's instincts are much better than his own. This is all because of the good input. The past lives realized that they had to keep their hopes alive. In the camp, the elder was telling off the leader of his bandits. He was furious that Baek Homan had managed to escape. In addition, the corpse of the hunter who chased Baek Homan was found without eyes. This hunter used to cut out his victim's eyes when he was alive. Baek Homan wanted to show that he is a man who repays his debts. And he repaid them in full to the last penny. Now the guy was alone on the 4th floor of the tower, without supplies and weapons. The elder believed that Baek Homan would not last long, so he ordered to continue the search. However, Baek Homan knew this and took the dead hunter's weapons and food. With this, he could last at least 5 days. And it would take him 5 days to reach the tower leading to the next floor. It was clear that Baek Homan would be heading there. The elder knew that once Baek Homan went higher, it would be almost impossible to find him. The gang had to stop the boy from climbing at all costs. The elder was not unreasonably annoyed, and shouted that he would cut off Baek Homan's seal as soon as he saw him. Meanwhile, Baek Homan began to release the stimulant made by dynamite. The tired guy also realized that the gang of spiders would get him anywhere on the 4th floor. But on the 5th, they probably wouldn't look for him. The only way out was to go upstairs. Baek Homan took refuge in a cave to spend the night, and decided to review his equipment. He took out an ordinary oil lamp and a dagger of equal value. Unlike things created by people, so-called objects have special properties. They are divided into categories: ordinary, rare, relics, and magnificent. Even items in the ordinary category cost a couple million won. The most powerful items were in the superior category, and even the Constellations could not obtain them. Baek Homan used the oil lamp and realized that it could be useful to him. In the light of the lamp, he looked at the dagger and noticed that the poison on it was the same as on the arrow. The dagger was called a painless dagger and was used for surgery because its blade was lubricated with a tranquilizer. The hunter whom Baek Homan killed had a toppling canopy of the usual category, a huge piece of cloth that could be used to close the entrance to the cave. This artifact helped to hide with the help of magic, because the cave was simply not visible from the outside. Before going to bed, Baek Homan decided to practice his skill. In the morning, Baek Homan woke up. It was hard to believe that he could sleep in such circumstances. The arrow wound had almost healed thanks to the memory of Dynamite, who had prepared a remedy. Baek Homan thought that Dynamite was not quite like an ordinary alchemist. He also didn't understand why the memory was only given the 4th level of the skill. But the very usefulness of the skill depended on the imagination and ingenuity of its owner. For a second, he thought he was a genius. Baek Homan set off on his way. There were no traces of hunters nearby. This created the illusion of safety. But in order to survive, he had to be very vigilant and use his skill to the fullest. Using Dynamite's memory again, Baek Homan looked around and gathered the ingredients he might need. He prepared a healing potion and a parasite repellent. The forest in which Baek Homin was staying was a treasure trove of medicines and potions. Because of this, his mood rose sharply. If things went on like this, he would be able to survive alone. Baek Homin continued to search for the ingredients. He tried to catch a huge beetle, which curled up into a shell-armored sphere when it sensed danger. But by hitting the shell hard, the boy forced the creature to open up again. Using the memory of the warrior, whom the skillful man himself nicknamed the Nameless One, Baek Homin struck a finishing blow and killed the beetle. The boy realized that depending on the part of the body, the life you choose can also change. His seal began to heat up and hurt. This was the opposite effect of using the ability. Baek Homin could not use the seal for more than a minute. Every ability has a price. In the evening, Baek Homin managed to set up camp and cook beetle meat on the battey. It was really tasty. But the fact that Baek Homin's life is now under a terrible threat was like a lump in his throat. Baek Homin's emotions also changed while using the skill. He felt elated. He could only rely on himself now. This is an obvious change, considering that Baek Homin was left alone. Now the main task was just to survive. Using beetle shells and his memory, he managed to make himself armor. At this level, even simple defense was very useful. With the armor, the boy went hunting for stronger creatures. He attacked and defeated a giant hornet. Baek Homin also analyzed all the cases of using memory and realized that it cannot be used for everything. For proper use, a specific goal was required. If the owner is obsessed for some reason or because of some emotion, the effectiveness of the skill changes. The emotional state most likely affected the synchronization rate. At this stage, the best synchronization was with the One. Nameless and Dynamite didn't give even 20% synchronization. Even though Baek Homin used their experience the most, the synchronization was too low. The life of the one who was chosen only once synchronized with the guy 5 times better than the others. And when the seal was formed, the synchronization was almost 100%. Did this mean that the only one in his life had also changed the seal? The guy wondered what would happen when the synchronization was 100%. They say that when your seal is formed, constellations often contact you. But Baek Homin was not chosen by any of the constellations. They all look down on him, thinking that his seal is useless. But Dynamite, Nameless, and the One help him. People he has never met. The guy thought that it didn't matter if they chose him, the situation was still the best. Especially with people he had never met. The only one was pleased that his current life recognized his strength. But he was also a little indignant that he was not used to catch bugs. The only one was bored in the subconscious. He wanted to get to the real world. The only one said he was no worse than Nameless and Dynamite. And Dynamite said that the One synchronization was the highest. This means that the One and Baek Homin are the most similar to each other. That's why the guy is so good at staying afloat. The One agreed and went to clean up the mess made during his tantrum. Nameless asked if the One often behaves like this. Dynamite replied that the great magician was calm compared to the way he treated Nameless. The One was confused. Finally, he had the opportunity to show his skills, and he had only been summoned once. Dynamite hoped that someday he would be able to talk to Baek Homin and make the great mage not be so upset. The One heard this out of the corner of his ear and got the idea. Nameless didn't really understand what the great magician meant. He explained that the reason many children died was due to the percentage of connection. Dynamite asked the One what children he was talking about. Was the only one married? But it turned out that all the Baek Homins unfortunately died single. Nameless caught a huge spoiler. The only one said that even if he didn't marry, he was responsible for a huge number of growing Homin. Dynamite asked if there was a way to get in touch with their present lives. Thanks to their memories and past lives, they have the ability to influence the present. If they manage to control the tower system, they will most likely be able to expand the skill's capabilities. Of course, This has great risks and is very dangerous. Nameless asked if the Grand Mage was lying. Dynamite replied that he did not know. Even he did not fully understand what to do. But if there is a way, there is no need to wait. It's time to start acting. The only one added that they need the opportunity and enough time to change the seal. This will not just lead to overheating of the hand. Using the memory for so long will simply melt Baek Homan's skin. And Baek Homan himself doesn't use the seal for more than 1 minute either. Dynamite thought they couldn't risk his hand. The only one assured him that they could fix it before anything happened. The question was whether they would have the nerve and courage to do it. But the tower has never worked as planned either. Since they don't know when the opportunity will arise, they need to start preparing now. The one raised his hands in the air and began to create a large number of magic circles in the sky. Nameless was afraid that the one could interact with this world in such a way. But Dynamite said that only the great Magus can do this, so it was better not to distract him. 3 days passed in the real world. Baek Homan noticed that significant changes had occurred in his body during this time. At this level, the hunters seemed to him to be just defenseless children. So, after defeating another hunter, Baek Homan ordered him to return to the elder and tell him to leave him alone. Baek Homan realized that the elder's men were faster than he was. This was his third battle, so they were catching up with him. He also continued to hunt, so he was quite tired. Suddenly, he saw a tower to go to another floor. Baek Homan smiled. He had managed to collect many hunting items from the battles, so he was definitely ready to cross over. Meanwhile, the elder was furious. The bandit leader said that it was not just luck. This phrase infuriated the elder. He was sure that something was wrong with Baek Homan. But the bald leader asked the elder to calm down and not to raise his hands against the hunter. It could cause the hierarchy to collapse. The bandit advised the elder to go down to the floor below, because his being on the 4th floor makes it difficult for everyone to work. The bandit promised to continue the search. The elder agreed, but angrily said that he would keep an eye on everything. Baldy swore to the elder that he would bring Baek Homan's hand with the seal. Meanwhile, Baek Homan had already arrived at the entrance to the tower and decided to do some training. The parasites appearing near the tower could significantly raise his level. There were rumors that once you got to the 5th floor, it was impossible to go down until you reached the 10th floor. Suddenly, Baek Homan felt someone's presence. It was the same bald bandit with his men. Obviously, they were looking for Baek Homan. The bandits, not finding Baek Homan, thought that he had already gone up to the 5th floor. The leader decided to follow him. In his opinion, 2 days would be enough to catch the boy. His men were scared. None of them had ever been to the 5th floor before. The prospect of walking up to the 10th floor to return did not seem good. But the bald man assured them that he had climbed to the 10th floor many times, and if they all listened to his orders, everything would be fine. He ordered them to go ahead. The gang had no choice, and they agreed, entering the portal. While going through the portal, Baldy thought that Baek Homan could have outsmarted him by faking his footprints near the tower. He realized that Baek Homan hadn't gone through the portal yet. He hadn't. Baek Homan was following the footsteps of the huge vermin to remain invisible. The boy knew that Baldy was too strong for him now, and it was better to avoid him. Besides, now he would most likely die instantly after entering the 5th floor. That way, if the gang goes to the 5th floor, he can avoid a collision. But Baek Homan's plan failed. The bald bandit sneaked up behind him. He didn't fall for Baek Homan's trick. Baldy explained that newcomers often hide behind vermin tracks. This is a very slow way to escape. Besides, if you look closely at the traces, everything becomes visible. Baek Homan began to mock the enemy, saying that he was walking in circles looking for him. Baldy didn't understand why Baek Homan lied to the elder about his skill. But Baek Homan didn't believe it. Besides, he had already told him the truth. He thought it was strange that this usually silent bandit was talking so much. Most likely, he was recovering his strength. The bandit gave Baek Homan one last chance and told him to follow him, and then he would live, but his hand with the seal would be cut off. But Baek Homan did not like this option. He activated his memory by choosing. Baldy was surprised that the guy had such fighting skills. He realized it was the effect of memory. The bandit was blocking Baek Homan's attack. It seemed to Baek Homan that he would not have enough time to defeat the enemy. The time limit was not playing into his hands. The bandit kept offering to give up his hand. But it was clear that Baek Homan would not agree. He took out a package of pills and ate one of them. The bald man immediately realized that it was a stimulant and asked him where he got it. Baek Homan replied that he had taken the drug from the hunters he had defeated. The drug put a buff on the guy's body with a 5-minute body boost. The balance of power began to change. It seemed to Baek Homan that he might go crazy at any moment. But he had to win. The bandit was in a difficult situation, but not a critical one. With a sharp swing of his axe, he broke Baek Homan's weapon. This shocked the guy, and he missed the first blow. Baek Homan fell to the ground. His seal was already burning and beginning to hurt significantly. The bald man recognized Baek Homan's strength by using his skill. Baek Homan felt like death was coming at his heels. Meanwhile, in his subconscious, a fight broke out between his past lives. The only one did not understand why the warrior king could not defeat the enemy. The king explained that he had lost control of his body due to the use of a stimulant. Then the one reproached Dynamite for not explaining the effects of the stimulant. But Dynamite said that Baek Homan knew everything. Baek Homan thought that the power of the skill was not enough to win and used the stimulant. The only one was angry with his other selves and said that he shouldn't have trusted them. At this rate, the guy risked dying. The only one asked when the seal would be ready for a new challenge. It took some more time. The only one was glad. Now was the time to strengthen the seal. The others did not like this decision. But there was no other way out. The only one suggested that the king would most likely be summoned again. Then his task was to make sure that the skill did not stop working, even if Baek Homan's hand completely burned. But the king wasn't sure if he could control the duration of the memory with his will. He had only been summoned once, so he was not sure. But then he managed to hold out longer than Dynamite and the king, so there is no time limit. It all depends on the situation and the ability to tolerate the pain in your hand. The only one repeated once again the task that the warrior king had to fulfill at any cost. In the real world, Baldy was already raising his axe for the finishing blow. Baek Homan managed to dodge at the last moment. Baldy felt that the balance of power was back on his side. Indeed, without his weapon, Baek Homan was almost helpless. So he ran away from the enemy. Exhausted, he fell to his knees and vomited. This meant that the effect of the stimulant was over. Now Baek Homan's body was completely exhausted. The status window said that Baek Homan was suffering from severe lethargy. There was no time for that now. He raised his fist up and hit the ground with all his might, breaking his arm. Using the pain, he tried to get rid of the debuff. The opponent noticed this and thought the battle was over, because it was impossible to continue fighting with one hand. Baek Homan grabbed his backpack to use as a shield. But that was not enough. To win, he had to use his memory. And the enemy also realized this. So, before it was activated, the enemy launched an attack, realizing that Baek Homan would not be able to dodge. But when the axe was centimeters away from Baek Homan's head, he took out his magic lamp and activated it, blinding the bald man. The enemy stopped his attack and grabbed his head. Baek Homan pulled out his dagger with a tranquilizer, preparing for the second round. The bandit was furious at Baek Homan's dirty trick and continued to attack blindly. By this time, Baek Homan's seal had almost cooled down, and it was time to return to the normal pace of the fight. Baek Homin chose the warrior king. The king noticed that Homin had a different approach to battle. This was the effect of fighting a strong opponent. Baek Homin rushed to attack under the flashes of light from the magic lamp. Limey noticed that Baek Homin's movements had become more perfect in a very short period of time. In order to survive, Homin had to overcome the enemy in less than a minute. Meanwhile, the one was doing his best to quickly change the seal. It was very risky. The one could disappear if he failed. He was ready for it. Homin had to hold out a little longer. The bandit regained his sight, and he immediately attacked Homin in response. The chance was lost. In addition, Baek Homin's body could not keep up with the warrior king's movements, and time was running out. Sparks began to fly from the seal. Homin wanted to disable the skill, which went against the one's plans. Was this really how it would end? And then, suddenly, Homin stabbed himself in the arm with a dagger with a tranquilizer. It was supposed to dull the pain. He smiled. It was exactly what was needed. The guy's courage was amazing. We had to continue reformatting the seal. The bandit was frightened by such determination. He started waving his second axe in a panic. But Baek Homin managed to slip under the axe and stab the enemy's body, causing him to fall dead. Baek Homin could not believe that he had killed a man. It was a huge stress. He begged for someone to tell him that he was not guilty. A game window appeared in front of Baek Homin, which said that the one liked him. This meant that the great magician had managed to establish a connection with Homin. Dynamite was amazed by the fact that he was the only one who managed not only to redesign the seal, but to change the system itself. It was not just magic, but a real miracle. Dynamite continued to praise the one. The past lives celebrated their victory. The three constellations in the subconsciousness like Baek Homin's fighting spirit, and the game window immediately showed it to the boy. The warrior king didn't really understand why the one had almost disappeared just to be able to give him a like. He expected something more. A working and permanently relevant line of communication. But Dynamite and Yetini were incredibly happy. For them, it was really a great feat. Homin was a little bit overwhelmed by the amount of feedback. He was flattered to receive such a huge number of likes from his constellations. How did he even know about constellations in the first place? And if they're sending him likes at this very moment, are they watching him? Most likely, yes. Constellation surveillance looks good, especially when you enter the world of hunters. Then Baek Homin decided to contact them and ask if they would send likes because he did well. And then he asked them to send something other than a like, but he got a like again. It seems that was the only message I could get from them. But even that was better than nothing. His arm started to hurt like hell again, and the tranquilizer was running out. Baek Homin decided to ask Dynamite how to create a medicine for recovery, and used his memory skills. After a while, the medicine was ready. Baek Homin was satisfied because the medicine he made was no longer of the lowest class, but of the middle class. Baek Homin thanked Dynamite, and received 2 likes from Dynamite, and the only one in return. The one sent likes to literally any action Homin took. Homin liked this. At first, he thought that his connection with the constellations was impossible, but now 3 of them were constantly sending him likes. As he was falling asleep, he thought it would be nice to meet them. As soon as he closed his eyes, Homin passed out and woke up in the morning. The pain in his arm was almost gone. It was all thanks to Dynamite's medicine. Homin felt great. He received another like from the one. Homin was surprised that the constellations were awake. On his way to the 5th floor, Homin decided to first gather medicinal herbs around the tower, which Dynamite liked. The constellations also reacted positively to his decision to go for a swim before going hunting. Baek Homin began to get annoyed with the uncontrolled swearing. So Homin came up with a way to communicate. If the answer to his question was yes, he had to send a like, and if the answer was no, he had to send nothing. In this way, the one confirmed his membership in the constellation. Homin asked if the constellations belonged to another tower, but received no response. So they were also from the Seoul Tower. Baek Homin had never heard such names for constellations, so they are not very well known. Even if we take into account the fact that half of the constellations died in the Civil War. Constellations are absolute creatures. It is very strange that 3 of them remained unknown. Meanwhile, in his subconscious, Dynamite asked the great magician why they were only capable of swearing. In response, the one said that this was the only way they could remain invisible to the tower. The king said that swearing is a very vague and annoying method of communication. There is not even a dislike button, or at least some kind of negative reaction. But the one reminded him that he had risked his life even for the sake of liking, so he should be happy with what he had. With this method, Homin's stock of questions was very limited. But later on, he still had to try to ask as many as possible. In addition, his synchronization rate with the warrior king had increased significantly during the last battle. Homin was surprised that yesterday it was only 20%, and today it was as high as 91%. The battle with the bandit was very significant. It meant that being in a critical situation might increase synchronization. Or maybe the killing increased synchronization. It was still unknown. Baek Homin's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp sound. At first, he thought it was the Elder's hunters. He turned around in horror and saw a web on which a huge spider was eating one of the hunters. This surprised him even more. There should not be such spiders at this level. They are too strong. Most likely, it was a mutant. It was very dangerous to be near it. The constellations understood that the mutant spider was none other than the boss of this floor. And there was a lot of money in killing him. Each of the Homins had encountered this spider. The guild master sold its cores for a lot of money. His name was the Black Forester. But the constellations noticed that this mutant was still very young, and had not yet grown to the level of a boss. In a month, he would grow up and be able to take over not only this floor, but also the other floor, and close the supply routes from other floors. In other words, Homin was lucky, because now he can finish him off. The constellation started sending swear words, hinting at a battle. But we need to be more vigilant. In this battle, tricks with lamps and tranquilizers will not work. Constellation continued to curse. Baek Homin watched the creature for a while before the fight, but the spider unexpectedly attacked first. Homin barely had time to dodge. He was shocked by the creature's speed. He immediately used his memory to summon the warrior king. He had experience against spiders. The similarity of experience was small, only 34%. The spider kept hitting Homin with its paws, and the boy hid behind his dagger. The warrior king had already had experience fighting such spiders. So, having dodged another attack, Homin seized the moment to get closer. He climbed under the spider's belly and stabbed it in the stomach, cutting it almost in half. The spider was defeated. Homin instinctively knew its weaknesses. He was able to defeat the spider himself, a mutant he had seen for the first time in his life. The experience of a constellation is no joke. Suddenly, Homin was covered by a huge shadow. It was another Pavu much bigger. It opened its jaw, from which a web flew out. Baek Homin did not have time to react and was grabbed. He decided to pretend to be a meter high and let himself be caught. The huge spider took him to its lair and hung him upside down from the ceiling. Baek Homin was not the first or the 10th in this lair. There were many victims of the spider. The boy was lucky that the spider went on to hunt. He had to get out. He melted the web with his seal and freed himself. It was a very creative use of his skill. Homin noticed a huge number of spider eggs on the floor. Why were there so few spiders? The king knew the answer to this question. Spiders eat each other. The strongest survives and becomes the boss of the floor. Those who are ready to become the boss eat their relatives to gain strength. But There was a person who overcame his instincts and escaped. This spider was killed by Baek Homin. Now he had to kill the real boss of the floor. He had almost no resources for the battle. Only spider claws and sticks. The good news was that his synchronization rate had increased. Surprisingly, it was even over 100. The system offered a reward for improving synchronization. Homin had a choice. Equipment, skills, characteristics, memory. It was hard to choose. The opinions of past lives were also divided. The king wanted to choose characteristics. Dynamite wanted to choose skills. But the one said that there was only one right choice. Homin could get everything except memory by climbing the tower, and memory was the only way to get it. The others agreed. The memory of a constellation has information from the future, and it could also strengthen the skill itself. But what if Baek Homin chose the last option, the equipment? The only one who didn't believe it. He said that Baek Homin wasn't stupid enough to choose the equipment. Equipment is for show, training and a strong spirit are important for a constellation. He was the only one who was sure that Homin would choose memory. But the boy himself thought differently and, of course, chose the equipment. The past lives were shocked. The only one was angry. Constellation equipment is a popular choice of hunters. When a person became a constellation, the tower sent him a test. And if he passed it, he received a unique weapon. The items given out by the tower are of the superior quality. Of course, they have unrealistic capabilities. Since they can only be obtained after the death of a constellation or by inheritance, such weapons are priceless. Baek Homin thought it was obvious that he needed a weapon. But when he chose the equipment, he never received anything, and 100% of his synchronization with the king was deducted. The synchronization rate was almost zero. Perhaps he should have used a skill for effect? In addition, the constellations did not react to Homin's choice. He began to realize that he had made a mistake. The only one was just furious. Suddenly, Homing noticed an old, dull knife near one of the spider's victims. He was glad because it was at least some kind of weapon. Before he could raise the weapon, he heard the spider. It turned out that he hadn't gone hunting, but was molting in one of the rooms of the cave. He had to kill it before it finished molting. When Homing attacked the spider, he noticed that the knife could not pierce its shell. The spider reacted to the blow and finished molting. Homing jumped away from the creature. He had to aim for its weakest point. He ducked under the spider's belly and struck a familiar blow, but again to no avail. This spider was stronger. The spider responded with a paw and broke Homing's dagger. Seeing this, Homing ran away. The seal was beginning to cure. There were 30 seconds left. The spider had trapped the victim in a dead end. Is this really the end? Where is the weapon he had chosen as a bonus? Why doesn't it appear? The game window suddenly popped up. Activation of the Warrior King's weapon. The broken dagger began to burn with a column of flame. It began to bear the name of the 10,000 sword maker. The spider had already struck the decisive blow. All or nothing, Homing also struck back. Suddenly, the spider was cut in half. With a single blow, Homing couldn't believe it. He looked at the broken burning dagger, which began to turn to dust. The dagger had regained its old name. Homing did not know what had happened. He was the only one who liked the battle. He accepted Homin's choice and justified it. Homin nearly died again. The king said that the master of the 10,000 swords would not help Homin at this stage. He is only useful when you have mastered the skills of all existing weapons. It doesn't matter if it's a dull knife or a rusty saw. These weapons can unlock their potential. But due to his lack of experience, the current Homing will not be able to give it a natural form. Every time he uses a sword master, the weapon in his hands will break, until he gets the hang of it. But if he had been given another of the king's weapons, Homing would have been deadly. In a way, he was lucky. Homing overcame mortal danger again. He decided that it was better to think in a positive way now. Meanwhile, Baek Homin tried again to summon the sword master, but he failed. He did not know the conditions for use. He realized that he was alive only because of this weapon. After recovering a bit, he began to collect the loot. Homin began digging through the spider's insides to find a piece of the tower's gold. The blood of the tower, a piece of light, a fragment of a star. Since the towers appeared, the gold had many names, but it had only one purpose: to change the seal. With the destruction of the old world, gold mining stopped as well. So there is not much of it left. Now gold appears only in one place: in the parasites created by the tower. For some unknown reason, gold forms in them like kidney stones. Baek Homin thought that the piece from the boss would be bigger, but this one was pretty good. The situation was perfect. Not only had he miraculously survived, but he had also gotten some gold. Next, Ho Ming used dynamite again and began to take the rest of the loot from the spider. Much of the rest was useless. Much of it was of little use. But there was also something very valuable that the Constellations had mentioned: the shadow core. Dynamite estimated the core at 400 million won. Ho Min was delighted with this expensive find and began to thank the dynamite. He could barely earn 100 million working for the elder, and here is a jackpot. So much money from a monster living on the lower floors. The thought of this mafioso earning billions of won from the lower floors made Ho Min angry. Ho Min thought he didn't need to climb the mountain now. He could just sell this cannonball and make some money to prepare for the tower climb. He could now deal with the elder's hounds in peace. Half a month had passed. Baek Homin went down to the first floor. Normally, the elevator would take 3 days to get down, but for some reason, they all suddenly broke down. One way or another, he came to a place where he couldn't hide from the elder. Maybe after half a month, this bandit stopped chasing Ho Min? I had to think positively. There were unexpectedly many hunters on the ground floor, and you don't usually see that many downstairs. Walking through the streets on the ground floor, Ho Min saw a child begging for money. He remembered his childhood and how he had to beg. Out of compassion, Baek Homin reached into his pocket for a coin. But the kid who asked for the money called Ho Min a bum and told him to get the hell out of his place. Ho Min was surprised that the kid really looked like him. If the kid was talking about the territory, it meant that he was from the elder. Ho Min asked the kid about his eyes, what the elder was growing, and who was responsible for it. He gave him a coin for the information. It turned out that Ho Min's friend was watching, and he had overcome the engraver with him. It wasn't hard to find him. Hyun-soo was surprised. He didn't believe that Ho Min would come back. Ho Min smiled and told his friend that he knew everything, so they had to play friendship in front of the elder's people. If they hide, the elder will be told that Ho Min and Hyun-soo have reunited. So, Hyun-soo had better not do anything stupid and listen to Ho Min carefully. Ho Min had a lot of questions. It turned out that the number of hunters on the ground floor was due to the fact that the Platinum Monarch had blocked the elevators for security reasons. The Platinum Monarch is the ruler of Seoul Tower, and his plaid is like a royal. Nothing prevents him from controlling the entrances and exits of the tower. But still, there must be a reason for such radical actions. And there was. The official reason was that dangerous parasites began to appear throughout the tower. On the 14th floor, a fiercely strong one appeared. But Ho Ming didn't believe it. He hadn't seen any other dangerous parasites besides the spider. Most likely, the real purpose of stopping the elevators was different. But there was one more thing that made Ho Ming very angry. His friend had betrayed him and started to pursue him along with the other gangsters. The friend began to make timid and uncertain excuses. It turned out that the elder had also grabbed him and began to interrogate him. Then he heard that Ho Min had disfigured the elder's face and fled. After that, 3 hunters were injured and 4 went missing. And the bald leader Kong Gun who also disappeared. Ho Min said that the bald one died in a battle with him. Ho-min's former comrade was surprised, and asked what kind of skills he had gained. But Ho-ming had no intention of answering. His plan was to sever all ties with the elder. He was going to kill the mafioso. This would have solved all his problems. But a comrade said that the leader of the spider organization would not sit idly by after killing one of his legs. If Ho-min was going to kill the elder, then all the other legs would have to be killed as well. And if Ho-min can kill so many people, the wicked paladins will start acting against him. And even if the boy could kill them, he would have to kill the monarch. It was impossible. But Ho-min said he had no choice. He was in a hole that was impossible to get out of. Hyun-soo didn't like that, and said he had a better idea than killing the elder. Hyun-soo knew the location of the elder's safe. It was in his office, in a secret room behind a closet. It is rumored that he kept an accounting book with his loans there, as well as a gold bar. Hyun-soo said he wasn't sure about the bar, but the safe was definitely there. He went into the room and made sure of it, but he didn't open the safe. Ho-min asked Hyun-soo why he would take such a risk. He said that the elder, like everyone else, pays him a small amount of money. Hyun-soo will never get the seal if he works faithfully for him. Ho-min asked why his friend hadn't said this before. Hyun-soo explains that the elder is willing to kill for this information. But if Ho-min was able to kill the leader of his thugs, there's a chance. We can throw the elder out on the streets of the lower floors to fend for himself. When he has no money, someone will definitely get even with him. The elder has many enemies, so Ho-min doesn't need to get his hands dirty with his blood. Baek Ho-min said it was hard to believe. Hyun-soo replied that it's much easier than running from a spider. And it was. Ho-min wanted to avoid encounters with spiders in his career as a hunter. He will need to go down to the city every week to replenish supplies. He will not be able to run away all the time. He needs to break the connection with the elder. Baek Ho-min agreed to listen to the plan. Hyun-soo told him that the elevators weren't actually blocked because of the monsters, because that was stupid. They could just send strong hunters to kill the vermin. The reason is different, namely the engraver that Ho-min and Hyun-soo were catching. That person was connected to the new currency that the monarch wanted to introduce. And what the engraver actually stole was the design of the new currency. The elder tried to buy the design back, and the platinum monarch tried to find the engraver at any cost, even blocking the tower's elevators. Hyun-soo planned to use this information to frame the elder. Most likely monarch and his men would be searching the streets. But how to draw attention to himself? Hyun-soo had one way. He took out a gold coin from his inside pocket. It was a sample of the new currency. Ho-min was angry with his friend because, despite being told not to, Hyun-soo stole the coin. But it played into the boy's hands. Hyun-soo alone would not have been able to pull off his plan. But with Ho-min, everything has a good chance of success. Ho-min was surprised by Hyun-soo's determination. Ho-min was still unsure because the plan was risky and could get out of hand. But if he forced the monarch to act, the spider and the elder would not care about the two of them. Ho-min decided to take a chance and agreed to the adventure. The monarch, meanwhile, was also determined to act. Ho-min and Hyun-soo stood in the square under the supervision of the elder's henchmen. Hyun-soo continued to explain his plan. As soon as the Platinum Monarch hears about the new currency in the city, he would show up at the same time to check it out. Hyun-soo promised to fill Ho-min in on the details later. They agreed to meet at 7 in the evening outside the elder's office. Baek Ho-min was worried that his friend might be being followed. But Hyun-soo ignored this and asked again about Ho-min's skill level. Ho-min replied that he had a 4th level skill, which was of no use to him at all. But Hyun-soo, like the elder's men, didn't believe him, saying that he didn't have to tell the truth if he didn't want to. Logically, there was no way Baek Ho-min could defeat the leader of the elder's thugs without a steep skill. Hyun-soo didn't question him and disappeared from Baek Ho-min's sight to prepare a plan. Left alone, Baek Homin asked his siblings what they thought about the situation. The only one of them gave him a simple, like, agreeing with his thoughts. In the evening, Baek Homin decided to leave the tower. He hadn't been outside the tower for several months, so he had to visit the city. Old Seoul. When it got dark, Baek Homin reached an abandoned industrial building. It was a local drug den. Looking at the people surrounding the building, he concluded that a drug den was a much more pleasant place than public guilds. The person in charge of selling the goods asked Homin what he wanted to buy, but Homing wanted to sell his unnecessary things on the contrary. This surprised the man. Why sell things here if there are guilds in the tower? Could it be something illegal? But Baek Homin assured the man that everything was clean and offered to take a look at the goods. Going inside to one of the brothel's rooms, Baek Homin laid out everything he had collected from the hunters he had killed so far. The trafficker was interested. The goods were really good, and the man asked who exactly Baek Homin was working for. But the guy asked him to ask fewer questions and clarified that he did not need money. Homin wanted to exchange the useless artifacts for something more useful to him for the same price, so he asked the merchant to evaluate the goods. The man said that the items were in good condition, so he could offer 8,000. This was even more than Baek Homin had expected. Most likely, the prices had risen because of the Platinum Monarch's manipulations with the elevators and the blocking of paths in the tower. Baek Homin immediately agreed to the proposed price. Since he was going to change, he asked to sell the items at a lower price. The trader asked what exactly Baek Homin needed. He said knives. He asked the shopkeeper to bring out all the knives he had in stock. After a while, the weapons were brought into the room. Homin immediately began to examine them and evaluate them with the help of the Constellations. The warrior king gave some of the knives bad marks. The merchant did not understand what exactly Baek Homin was muttering under his breath. But when he looked at the way Baek Homin sorted the knives according to their quality, he realized that the boy knew a lot about weapons. Without making any mistakes, Baek Homin separated the high-quality and undamaged blades from the old and fragile ones. The last knife he got his hands on was a rare class of knife. It was called a screaming knife, and its peculiarity was that it made a sharp noise with every swing. Although this knife was rare, no one wanted to take it because of its useless ability, so the merchant decided to sell it to Homin. The man offered 8,000 for the rare item, which was all of Baek Homhaya's capital. The boy noticed that the knife was quite interesting, but asked the merchant how much the knives on the left cost. The merchant was surprised. Homing placed the high-quality knives, which were suitable for many battles, on his right shoulder. On the left was all kinds of junk that he was ashamed to even put a price on. A little nervous, the merchant said the price was 3,000. Baek Homin agreed, and since he didn't need anything else, he asked for the remaining 8,000 in cash. But it was not profitable for the trader at all. The elevators were not working, so it was unknown how long it would take for the normal flow of currency to resume. He had to save money as much as possible. So he said he wouldn't give Homin the 5,000 in cash, and offered to get Homin the screaming knife instead. Homin smiled and agreed. The trafficker fell for his plan. In addition to the deal, Homin asked for a long hooded jacket. Meanwhile, 7 o'clock was approaching. Homing was approaching the meeting place. With confidence in his eyes, he asked a rhetorical question to the Constellations. Are they ready? The elder's office looked like an old building from pre-modern times. Once inside, Homin headed for the room where Hyun-soo was supposed to be waiting for him. Moving cautiously and quietly, he reached the door. Once inside, he noticed that Hyun-soo was not alone. A bunch of armed thugs led by the elder himself were already waiting for him. Hyun-soo was beaten and tied up. Hyun-soo asked Homin why he had come here alone. But Baek Homin told him that he had a feeling that this was exactly what would happen. He said that Hyun-soo was the only person he considered a friend. Ho-min didn't want to believe that he was right until the end. Hyun-soo said he didn't understand what he was talking about. But if Ho-min's assumption was correct, then he had to kill his friend. Hyun-soo was scared. Ho-min explained. If he had managed to steal from the elder and escape before Hyun-soo framed him, he would have had no reason to kill his friend. But Hyun-soo had been in cahoots with the bandits from the beginning. The elder had hoped that Hyun-soo would be useful as a hostage, but no one in the room believed him anymore. Hyun-soo looked at the elder and began to apologize to him in a panic, which finally gave him away. He even let himself be beaten to make it more convincing. But Ho-min thought that this was the only way for Hyun-soo to survive, so maybe he shouldn't be angry with him. Ho-min turned his attention to the bandits. Each of them was armed to the teeth. This city was full of devils. And in order to survive, Ho-min had to become a devil himself. The elder was sure that he had the advantage, so he suggested that Baek Ho-min surrender. If Baek Ho-min wanted to survive, he had to work for the elder as a hunter for another 20 years. The elder began to talk about money, weapons, and recognition. But Baek Ho-min told him that he hadn't originally come to the office to steal the safe. The robbery was only an alternative. He didn't want to kill his friend with his own hands. But if he has no choice, that elder will die right after Hyun-soo. After that, he'll kill the spider if it gets in his way, then the godless paladins, and then even the platinum monarch himself. The elder's people started laughing immediately. They said that one must know the limits of one's abilities. Laughing at the boy, they said that they did not understand how their leader died at the hands of such a braggart. The elder felt that behind the laughter his people were hiding an overwhelming anxiety. He did not understand how it was possible to change so much in just 6 months. Baek Ho-min continued his manic speech. He said that he would kill anyone who pointed a knife at him, take them out of hell, and cut off their heads. The elders also panicked, but rejected this emotion. Even if Ho-min had changed, he was still the little boy begging under his wing. The elder shouted that he had had enough and ordered the boy to be killed, and the hand with the seal brought to him. The thugs attacked Ho-min in a heap. But the boy already had a plan. He activated the warrior king's skill. Master of 10,000 swords. He picked up a screaming knife and waved it in the air. The knife cracked, but the effect was enormous. A piercing screech filled the entire building. The light bulbs began to crack, casting the room in pitch blackness. The elder's men clutched their ears, trying to muffle the incessant screaming. Their eardrums could not take it anymore. The sound filled the entire building. Ho-min's knife began to fall apart in his hands. This was the price of using the warrior king's skill without proper experience with weapons. But Baek Ho-min was prepared for such consequences. The attack was still incredibly useful. He threw the rest of the knife aside and unzipped his jacket. The real battle was about to begin. The thugs realized that this attack was planned. This dirty trick enraged them. The elder thought that Ho-min was trying to escape from him in this way. So he told his men to find a lantern and kill the boy. But it was a mistake. Ho-min was not going to run away. He summoned the warrior king and rushed into battle. Immediately, he managed to stab one of the enemies with a knife, tearing open his stomach. The next one, who wanted to attack Baek Ho-min from behind, instantly lost his arm. The axe fell to the floor with it severed. With a finishing attack, Ho-min pierced the enemy's neck. But hearing the sounds, other thugs were already rushing into the fight. Pulling out 2 more knives, Ho-min slashed his attacker's throat. One of the bandits panicked and asked how Ho-min could see them in such darkness. After saying this out loud, he immediately died from a sharp stab to the neck. The truth was that Ho-min did not see anyone in the house. But the body that he had been training all this time reacts to the instincts of the warrior king. Ho-min feels the fear of enemies even if they are not in his field of vision. One of the thugs managed to hit Baek Ho-min with a knife, but the armor made of beetle shells was impenetrable. With a counterattack to the head, Baek Ho-min killed the Nedrigwa, piercing him through and through. The knife's blood was flying everywhere. The bandits continued to freak out. One of them lit a magic lamp to see Ho-min, but it was too late. In one sharp movement, the boy approached him and slit his throat, and in the same second he killed two more with precise stabs. One of the elder men shouted to his allies to use their skills. But Ho-min's speed of attack was unsurpassed. He put his armored shoulder under the blow, and then finished the bandit off with a kick to the body. As he was dying, the bandit called Ho-min the devil, who came down from the tower and fell dead. Baek Ho-min looked around at the pile of dead bodies. These people, after learning bad skills and being disappointed in their dreams of conquering the tower, broke down and started killing, robbing, and raping. Ho-min said that the bandits are the devils of this city. Baek Ho-min's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door closing. Looking around, he didn't see the elder and Hyun-soo. They had both fled during the battle. Stepping over the dead bodies, Ho-min rushed to catch up with the two. There was nowhere to run. Meanwhile, the one noticed that this was a new record. And this record was not for killing people in a short period of time. It was a record for the number of dangerous situations in which Baek Ho-min could die. The only one who didn't like that the guy was taking such a risk. Dynamite also agreed that it was reckless to come to the lair and wait for a trap there. But despite this, Ho-min was going to kill everyone there anyway. We had to find a more effective way to solve the problem. The only one who noticed that after the guy there was a new problem. A woman who would appear. When each of the past lives killed an elder, it was she who appeared. From that moment on, everything depended on luck. Baek Ho-min found the wounded elder behind an office building. He could no longer stand on his feet, but still tried to escape. Ho-min noticed the condition of the man. The elder started shouting again about ingratitude and how he was the one who raised Ho-min and Hyun-soo. Then Ho-min realized that the wound in the elder's heart was from his former comrade. Hyun-soo decided to mortally wound the bandit to frame Baek Ho-min. Ho-min realized that the dying old man was no longer a threat to him and leaned over to talk to him. He asked how the elder had become so miserable, but the elder still held on to life. He said that his death would have catastrophic consequences. Ho-min replied that he realized that the spider would most likely hunt him down. Therefore, Ho-min advised the elder to pay off the spider to survive. The elder immediately agreed and told him where he had 2 gold bars, each worth 10 gold pieces. He also added that he could not give more, because he needed the money to run the city. But Baek Ho-min was not satisfied. He was not going to leave the elder in power, so he ordered him to give him everything. The elder continued to argue. He said that the spider was planning something big. Not only the neighborhood he controlled, but the entire city would be involved. Moreover, the entire tower was included in this plan. The elder was also a cog in this plan. He promised to put in a good word with the spider. Many hunters have already died, so the mafia needs people like Ho-min. But this agreement was not to be. Blood gushed out of the elder's mouth. The old man had promised Ho-min a place in the spider legs when he was dying. Ho-min believed him, because there was no point in lying before death. Ho-min decided to save him by calling Dynamite. But Dynamite saw the wound and said that too much blood had been lost. The light in the elder's eyes had already faded. Even after the Constellation arrived, it was too late. Baek Ho-min finally said, "Sleep well." The elder tried to say what would happen to Baek Ho-min, but before he could finish, he collapsed. Inspecting the corpse, Ho-min said that it was a fitting end for the elder. He wanted to say that his ties with the elder had been severed, but he heard a phrase from behind him ordering him not to move. A strange trembling gripped his entire body, and then he fell to the ground. He noticed 2 girls in white uniforms. One of them said that they had detained a suspicious person, and the other praised her for it. Baek Ho-min recognized the uniforms. It was the godless paladins. The girl with the black hair was sitting over the immobilized boy. She was amazed that such a young boy could kill so many. Ho-ming realized that the paladins had already checked the entire office. The woman with the blue hair said that if Baek Ho-ming's seal didn't show any signs of being strengthened, then he had either become a parasite or possessed by a shadow beast. Baek Ho-min couldn't move because of the suppression skills of one of them. It felt like his head was cut off from his body. The dark-haired girl said that she was the ruler of this tower. She is a platinum monarch named Yoon Seo-hyun. Baek Ho-min was surprised that it was a platinum monarch in front of him. The girl explained that she was personally investigating a case of counterfeit coins that were being actively distributed. Counterfeits that were created right before the launch of the new currency were a serious problem. The monarch could not find a place for herself, but Baek Ho-min seemed to have solved all her problems. Baek Ho-min was shocked. Could it be that the monarch would have killed the elder with her own hands? But the girl continued. She said that this was not a problem where she could act rashly. If the old man had escaped, the spider would never have been quiet. The monarch began to unbandage Ho-min's hand, which had the seal on it. But if the elder died, the spider would give up the idea. Thanks to this, the paladins confiscated the money made by criminal means. The monarch noticed the pattern of Ho-min's seal and thought for a moment, then continued. Despite the fact that the boy's actions were favorable to the monarch, no one but the paladins can commit vigilante justice, so the boy will face the death penalty for killing 8 people. Ho-min was scared. But the girl was in no hurry to finish her speech. Fortunately, there were 2 ways out. The first was to stand trial and face death at the hands of the monarch, and the second was to pretend that Ho-ming had been hired by the monarch as her personal hunter and had taken these measures after going through the necessary administrative procedures. At first glance, the choice was obvious: saving his life. But even if he survived, after accepting such conditions, his life would be completely in the hands of the Platinum Monarch. Baek Ho-min needed the advice of a friend. That's why the only thing he said after his capture was what he should do. The monarch thought that Ho-min was turning to her and asking her to decide his fate. Meanwhile, the warrior king sent Ho-min a like. But no more likes came. This meant that the Unified and Dynamite were opposed. Baek Ho-min knew that the Constellations meant him no harm if any of them opposed the agreement, and there were good reasons for it. He apologized to the monarch and was about to say that he could not accept the deal. But before he could finish speaking, the girl spoke about the financial component of the agreement. Every month, the monarch's hunters receive 50 silver coins. And for every day they stay in the tower, they get 10 extra. Ho-min could not believe what he was hearing. The monarch would also give him a place to live in the ruler's castle, and a discount on seal upgrades. Baek Ho-min agreed in a heartbeat. The monarch mockingly said that Ho-min agreed too quickly. But in his opinion, such an offer could not be refused. So, hiding behind the warrior king, he accepted the deal. The only one who was angry about Ho-ming's agreement was the king. In his opinion, if the monarch had gone so far for him, she would definitely not kill him. But Dynamite realized that none of the past Ho-mins would have refused such a deal. The only one remembered who the Platinum Monarch was, just like the other lives. Dynamite noticed that each of them had gone through this choice. In addition, the monarch saved his life and gave him a real opportunity to become a hunter. There was obviously only one choice. The only one said that the Platinum Monarch never makes decisions that can harm her, which means she is definitely planning something. The Constellations knew what fate awaited Ho-min next, but it was still a surprise for the boy. The warrior king, as the last one to die, was curious about what the others had to say about the proposal. He said that he regretted his agreement in the future, but he had little choice. The only one said that in the past he was also angry at the king's decision. The king would have died after the battle with the elder if the monarch had been late. Dynamite said that at the time the monarch found him, he was already a member of the guild. His skill specialized in alchemy and was quite valuable, so he avoided being involved. After trying to peel his seal off a piece of iron, his body was slightly deformed, but it was not a mistake. The only one said that he immediately gained a good skill, so he was able to take revenge much faster and did not have to rely on the monarch's help. The warrior king replied that the one and only were just lucky with dynamite. But the only one said that the king was also quite lucky. Other Baek men who failed to prove their worth were either ignored or killed by the Platinum Monarch. The only one who reminded me that the monarch puts price tags on people and uses them as she pleases, and when she has enough, she throws them away. The warlike king agreed with him. In his view of her, he could trust the monarch, but he could never call her a friend. In the past, the king had quarreled with the monarch because of her cynical attitude toward people. But that was not all that could be said about her. In the past, the monarch sacrificed her life for the sake of the warrior king. It is not known why, but at that moment she decided that Baek Ho-min's life was more valuable than hers. The warrior king could never forget the image of that lonely snow-covered back. And the king sent a message about the monarch's proposal, because the memories got into his head. The constellations were confused, but one fact is certain. Baek Ho-min had become the Platinum Monarch's hunter, and had also overcome the curse of death, and would not die in the first month. The constellations decided to dismiss the bad news and celebrate this victory. The next day, Ho-min woke up in a huge palace. The day was quite sunny. He lifted his head and looked around. It was a luxurious bedroom with a huge bed. The place was filled with expensive porcelain fittings. Baek Ho-min remembered that he had been brought here yesterday after the incident, and he had passed out after drinking some suspicious tea. An unexpected development. Baek Ho-min examined his seal, and the condition of his body in general. It turned out that he had been treated while he was sleeping. The thought crept into his mind that the monarch was not as cruel as they say. Suddenly, Baek Ho-min noticed a girl in the paladin's van standing in his room. The girl who had accompanied the monarch yesterday said that it was better for him to stay still for now. He needed time to recover. Baek Ho-min recognized her immediately. He immediately asked how long she had been here. The girl replied that she was the commander of the godless paladins, and her name was Dal Palak. Baek Ho-min was surprised and scared at the same time. He had heard of this girl, and she was given this name because she used to cut off people's heads like a doll. She usually carried a huge sword with her. As an executioner of cult members, she became the head when the Platinum Monarch came to power. Her reputation as an executioner was gained by her ruthless treatment of criminals. Ho-min was embarrassed to see her so close for the first time. The girl did not understand what exactly he was talking about. Baek Ho-min explained that he had once seen Paladin rescuing people at a crime scene. She broke into a building and saved 3 children inside. The girl was embarrassed and a little confused, saying that it was nothing unusual and that anyone would have done it in her place. The executioner Dal was the hunter closest to the current constellations and had 4 whole stars. For ordinary people, she was a hero. The fact is that the current constellations never leave the tower. That's why the only person who is close to both the constellations and ordinary people is the tower doll. Baek Ho-min continued to tell the girl about her exploits. When a beast appeared on the 28th floor, bringing bad predictions for the future, Executioner Doll fought it by herself for 3 days and received a star for it. The doll denied this fact, saying that the battle lasted only a day. Then Baek Ho-min asked another question. His interest was not quenched. Was it true that the girl herself had killed Baek Jo-wook and his organization? This person was one of the spider legs. Ho-min was especially curious. There were also rumors that the girl had stopped one of the cult members who wanted to poison the water supply. Ho-min was not going to stop. The girl just kept getting embarrassed and saying that these stories were exaggerated. She said she just did what she had to do. Homin asked if she knew she was being called a hero. People say that she is the only paladin who really cares about the fate of ordinary people. Liolka replied that she didn't think she was worthy of the title, hero. It's just her duty. And she added in response, Homin himself took care of the elder and his thugs with his own hands. Baek Homin sincerely said that his feat was a much lower level, and they were just average bandits. He was no match for the paladin doll. The girl's gaze changed dramatically. She looked at Baek Homin with a reproachful look and attested to the fact that Baek Homin did not have any accomplices. Homin became alert. He realized that the girl wasn't just standing there to chat with him. The paladin doll looked at him sternly and said that she had noticed his attempt to talk her into talking. This time, the boy realized that doll's shyness and embarrassment were just a tool to lower his guard. Ho Ming exhaled a sigh of relief and confirmed that he had no accomplices. He added that he wasn't trying to appease her. He just really admired her. The girl asked if it was true. Baek Homin asked why he was under surveillance. The monarch told him that hunters under her wing are not prosecuted. The doll replied that this surveillance takes place independently of the ruler's will. For the ruler to exempt Homin from the law, a basic legal procedure was required. Baek Homin understood. Regardless of the supreme power, the paladins clearly state that they are a punitive unit and are not dependent on the rules of the tower. The hunter doll started asking questions. First of all, she asked whether Baek Homin had visited the security zone of Seoul Tower in its vicinity or the basement of the tower. Baek Homin denied it. Without lingering on the first question, doll immediately asked the next one. Namely, how could Baek Homin, with a 4th-level seal, kill so many people? It didn't even show any traces of refinement. Baek Homin hesitated for a moment, but finally decided to tell the truth. The constellations helped him. The puppet immediately asked which constellations, and Baek Homin had to say their names and titles. Baek Homin felt a lump in his throat. He realized that if this girl was listening so closely, she must have her own guesses about this. Should he have told her their ranks? Suddenly, a light from dynamite appeared in front of Baek Homin's eyes. Baek Homin immediately named him. The puppet repeated the name after him. Baek Homin said that this was due to the blessing of the constellations, but it is also possible that it is his own hidden potential. There are constellations that have accidentally reached heights. The doll suggested that Baek Homin might be a prophet. Prophets are the youngest constellations in existence. They have risen to the current constellations with incredible speed. The doll told Homin that there was a good chance that Baek Homin was possessed by a shadow, or had become a parasite in the tower. In this case, even the status of the ruler's hunter would not save him. Baek Homin understood. The girl was hinting at him that he needed to prove that he belonged to humans. The seal disappears from people who have become parasites. But this only applies to seals made of gold. Not a single parasite with a silver seal has been registered. Most likely, parasites are not interested in silver because of its lower price. There was only one way to find out if Ho Ming was a parasite. The doll asked him to follow her for an interrogation with the monarch. Baek Homin went with the doll to the palace courtyard and immediately heard someone begging for mercy. Walking further, he saw a group of people tied up. One of them begged to be released, while another, even while immobilized, threatened to kill the monarch. The monarch took one of them by the neck with her hand and began to strangle him, passing sentence on him. She called his name and his crime, namely the rape of 3 girls. Her hand on his neck kept tightening, and the hair began to fall out of the criminal's head. The monarch said that in accordance with the law she would atone for his sin. With her hand, the monarch pulled all the energy out of the man, leaving him a lifeless, gaunt mummy. Only after the last drop of strength left the criminal's body did the monarch release her hand, and the lifeless body fell to the ground. The monarch told the man that he should rethink his sins in the next life. She was holding something in her hand. A paladin with a saucer approached her ruler. The monarch opened her hands over it, and a couple of gold coins fell out. One of the living prisoners asked the monarch why she had the right to punish them. But the ruler was not going to answer the criminal's questions, and continued to read out the sentences. The next one she punished was for arson and murder. Saying that this man's sins were incorrigible, she took the life out of his body and threw it on the floor. Then she poured several coins on the saucer again. Then she repeated the same with the last man. When she was done, and all three were lying dead, she turned toward Baek Homin. The monarch said that he had shown Homin something indecent. Baek Homin realized that it was the other way around. She had deliberately killed those people in front of him. He was reluctant to say his name. The doll asked the monarch if she could use the courtyard. The monarch asked why. The doll was probably going to test Homin's skills herself. The paladin confirmed that she was going to interrogate the boy. She made a suggestion. If Homing really killed 10 thugs, then he would be able to perform well in a battle against her. But the monarch said that was a bit much. Instead, the monarch suggested that he demonstrate his skills himself and ordered him to bring the victim here. After a while, the paladins brought not just anyone, but Hyunsu himself, who immediately recognized Homin. The monarch asked Baek Homin if the boy they had captured was indeed a subordinate of the elder, and was in the building with the others. Homin confirmed this fact. Tears began to form in Hyunsu's eyes. He didn't understand why Homin was standing next to the monarch. Homin realized that the boy had been caught against his will. Suddenly, he heard a shout from all three of the constellations. The monarch began to unwind the bandage on Homin's arm, repeating the word calmly. All three lights came to Homin again. He realized it was support. It was a wake-up call. Homin took his hand away from Monarch, which caused her great surprise. She looked at Baek Homin with an incredible desire to kill. She asked Homin to have someone calm them down if they didn't want to die. Homin couldn't believe what he was hearing. Could she really be talking to the constellations? The monarch came closer to the boy and began to whisper in his ear. She assured him that it was for the good of Homin himself. The boy was very scared. The monarch grabbed his hand again. Baek Homin did not understand what was happening, but he seemed to feel a battle between the constellations and the Platinum Monarch. The monarch smiled menacingly, which made the one a little wary. A second later, the ruler said that everything was ready and finished an incomprehensible procedure. The monarch advised Homin not to worry about the consequences and to show her what was behind the seal. Homing did not understand at first, but when he looked at the seal, he noticed that his terrible iron seal had turned into a platinum one, and the pain had also left his hand. The monarch then read out Hyunsu's sins. They included theft, violence, murder, and obstruction of justice, adding that attacking the ruler's minions while they were on a secret mission was a serious crime. Hyunsu was scared out of his mind. He couldn't believe that Baek Homin was the ruler's hunter. But Baek Homin realized that the monarch was lying to save his life. The monarch said that she usually punishes everyone herself, but this time she wanted to see the skills of her new hunter and asked Homin if he could do it. Baek Homin did not understand what exactly he had to do, and the monarch immediately threw the sword on the battlefield. Only one sword for the two of them, and she ordered them to start. Both boys realized what was coming next. Hyunsu looked at Homin with a heartbreakingly pitiful look, then closed his eyes and rushed to the sword, betraying his friend once again. All he could manage was to shout the word, "I'm sorry." Homin was shocked by his friend's actions. Hyunsu did not stop his weak and inaccurate attacks, which Homin could easily dodge. Hyunsu shouted that he would come to Homin's grave if he died for him. But Baek Homin pointed out that the monarch had not promised Hyunsu a pardon if he killed his friend. but Hyun-soo immediately jumped for his sword. During the fight, Ho-min kept wondering what exactly the monarch was trying to make sure of. Was it his ability to kill the thugs? If that was really the case, then she should have let the executioner doll come out to fight. But that wasn't the point. She looked at Ho-min's hand and waited for him to use his memory skill. But Ho-min was waiting for a more appropriate moment. It was still too early. He slipped past Hyun-soo's next attack and punched him in the nose, then grabbed his sword hand and throat. In a whisper, Ho-min began to communicate with Hyun-soo. Holding him tightly, he asked him once again if he remembered the moment when the monarch released the criminals. Ho-min explained that she wasn't going to do that. He offered Hyun-soo a plan. He'll pretend that he accidentally let his opponent go. At that moment, Hyun-soo should run for the exit behind Ho-min's back. Hyun-soo realized that Ho-min was deliberately moving toward the exit to avoid his attacks. Baek Ho-min ordered Hyun-soo to kick him on command and then run away. Hyun-soo, realizing that this was his only chance, agreed and thanked his friend. Ho-min gave the command. Hyun-soo punched Ho-min and broke free of the grip. Ho-min waited for his friend to run, but he just looked at him pitifully. But Hyun-soo did not run away. He tried to kill Ho-min one more time. His eyes reflected absolute betrayal and fear. Ho-min was in a difficult situation, but only at first glance. With a sharp left punch, he repelled Hyun-soo's attack. Ho-min was furious because of the betrayal. He gave his friend one last chance. He went around Hyun-soo's back and thanked him for remaining a traitor to the very end. Now Ho-min could kill him without hesitation. Hyun-soo was in a death throes. He begged Ho-min to stop and listen to him. But Ho-min didn't care anymore. He ordered the traitor to shut up and broke his neck. Hyun-soo couldn't even breathe. He fell down dead. The monarch immediately praised Ho-min. The monarch realized that Ho-min was trying to save his enemy to the last. She had also heard rumors that this was not the first time Hyun-soo had betrayed him. Ho-min explained that the traitor had been his friend before, so he didn't want to kill him. The monarch remarked that Baek Ho-min had killed him without hesitation. He replied that he didn't think it was necessary to feel sorry for friends like Hyun-soo. Monarch knelt down in front of Hyun-soo's corpse. She said that she liked the straightforwardness of the decision. Ho-min confirmed that he had not thought about it for long. The monarch added that she did not condemn the boy. Many people die when they cannot make a decision. Ho-min closed his eyes. The monarch continued her speech. She said that an important personal quality of a hunter is quick and unwavering determination. The monarch said that Ho-min would make a good hunter. The screaming doll interrupted the monarch by reminding him that the reason paladins obey the ruler is because the ruler upholds the laws. But right now, the monarch was purposefully avoiding the legal process for Baek Ho-min. The monarch held up a coin she had taken from Hyun-soo. She explained that she was using such methods to prevent the death of their little hero. She bit the platinum coin with her teeth and then gave it to Ho-min, congratulating him on his first mission and the fact that Ho-min was now the ruler's hunter. She gave the coin to him as a memento of today. Ho-min fell into deep thought. Previously, he had to work like an ox, endure pain and humiliation for just one gold coin. And now, he receives a platinum coin from the monarch. The only shame is that it's for the death of his only friend, Hyun-soo. His thoughts were interrupted by the monarch's hand stroking his head. As she stroked Baek Ho-min's hair, the monarch said that she did not understand why Ho-min was hiding his skills. But she added that it doesn't matter now. He would still become the ruler's hunter. Ho-min was embarrassed and blushed like a tomato. He had never felt such a gentle girl's hand before. The monarch smiled imperceptibly, lifting the edges of her lips. Meanwhile, in their subconscious, the Constellations did not understand what was happening to the monarch. The king and the one were shocked. They had never seen her like this. But Dynamite suggested that the monarch had fallen in love. In love with Baek Ho-min. The only one was not satisfied with this. He would always remember what Baek Ho-min went through because of her. Moreover, half of the deaths were because of her. The king confirmed this. He also died while in her unit. And in general, in the opinion of the one, Dynamite had no right to talk about such things. The monarch made Dynamite work without rest, and never patted him on the head. Dynamite said that was true, but she did sometimes gently encourage him. Their conversation was interrupted by the king, who suggested that they talk about more important things. Namely, about covering the seal. He was the only one who expected such an outcome after becoming a thinker ruler. Many Ho-ming died due to metal intoxication from the unfinished seal. But in this case, the warrior king did not understand why the one tried to stop it before the battle. The only one who answered was that she was not just trying to fix the seal, but was somehow trying to interact with it. It was strange and made him wary. The king asked if the monarch was really up to no good. But the one could not answer this question. Only time could clarify it. But it seems that the Platinum Monarch is aware of the existence of the Constellations. She dared to look into their world. Fortunately, the one was able to stop it and minimize all the risks. The king was still worried that the existence of the constellations inside Ho-min had been revealed. But it turned out that the one showed the monarch only Dynamite. Dynamite didn't mind if the Scarecrow doll knew his name, so the one showed it only to the monarch. But Dynamite did not like it. He allowed himself to be revealed to the puppet only because of the one's phrase that Dynamite was the weakest of the three. But Dynamite asked why the one had introduced him to the monarch. For the one, the answer was simple. Dynamite is the loser among the Baek Ho-min, so he should be the one to introduce them to the monarch. Meanwhile, in the castle, the monarch and Ho-min began a dialogue. The monarch said that she had heard about a constellation named Dynamite that was watching over the boy. Ho-min confirmed this information. The monarch smiled and repeated the word Dynamite. She asked Baek Ho-min to tell her more about him. This alerted Ho-min and Dynamite. The monarch told Baek Ho-min for the situation involving his hand. Ho-min asked if it had to do with the seal. The monarch explained that a seal not made of gold is fatal to the human body. Until the hand is cut off from the body, the poisonous metal and burns kill the person. The ruler said that Ho-min was good at using a seal, but he could not burn his hand in every battle. Baek Ho-min agreed. He fully understood the condition of his seal. The monarch smiled. If the boy understood, it would be much easier to explain everything. She applied a coating to his seal. The poison would no longer spread through the guy's body, and the seal's activation time would also increase. Baek Ho-min asked if the seal would heat up less, but the monarch denied it. She couldn't stop the heat from building up. It was the cost of using the skill. But if he could use the seal for a minute, he could now use it for 2 whole minutes. Baek Ho-min looked at his seal. He was confused. Not only had the monarch helped him escape punishment and given him the title of hunter, but she had also strengthened his seal. In a sense, she was his savior. Ho-min thanked the girl. But this fact made Ho-min even more afraid of her. There must be some reason for her actions. The monarch said that she wanted to see Ho-min's skills personally, but she was not going to take a bone from her dogs by force. She suggested that Ho-min strengthen his seal. Ho-min was surprised. But this is only possible if the constellations that watch over the boy allow it. Ho-min became wary. Then Monarch suggested that they talk about the Dynamite constellation. She asked the boy to tell her everything he knew about Dynamite. The boy agreed and began his story. When he finished, Monarch asked if that was all he knew. Baek Ho-min said yes. She was not satisfied with Ho-min's story. There were many inconsistencies, because the one and warrior king could not be mentioned. The monarch asked if Dynamite was helping Ho-min for free. Baek Ho-min confirmed this fact. The monarch thought about it, and then said she understood. She looked Ho-min in the eye. The monarch asked if Baek Homin knew that the tower was now completely closed. Baek Homin knew about it. There were a lot of people on the ground floor. The monarch explained that it was a security measure. A huge anomaly had recently occurred in the tower. Baek Homin did not understand what the monarch meant. The monarch said that several hitherto unknown constellations had been spotted in the tower. He was surprised. In this world, in order to become a constellation, one must receive stars. By gaining fame and achieving success, you can become a constellation when you get 5 stars. At this stage, all known constellations appeared in this way. Based on this fact, it's hard to believe that the unknown constellations came out of nowhere. Baek Homin asked the monarch if she knew their names. The monarch said that although they have been observing them, they have not learned anything so far. But they suspect that one of them is named Dynamite. The monarch asked Baek Homin how he felt about it. Baek Homin was wary and unsure of his answer. The viceroy looked at him suspiciously. Baek Homin did not know if he had done the right thing by revealing the dynamite. The monarch continued her story. After the appearance of these constellations, the tower went through a major structural failure. Monarch's people are investigating the matter. Baek Homin asked what monarch meant by structural changes. According to monarch, locations and parasites that should appear on the upper floors began to appear on the lower floors. This meant that locations that were in a stable state got out of control. With these changes, the elevators became unsafe to use and were forced to be blocked. Baek Homin thought it was the design of the new currency, but it was much more serious. It didn't look like monarch was lying now. The monarch also didn't know the reason for the unexpected appearance of the constellations, but she hoped it was for the best. Monarch got up from her seat and started to leave the room. She said that one of the hunters had already finished his investigation and returned. He would teach Ho Ming everything he needed to know. Ho Ming was surprised that he was not the only hunter of the ruler. The monarch said no. There are not many rulers, but among them, there are excellent hunters. The monarch introduced Ho Min to a young man who wore an eye patch over one of his eyes. His name was Kong Ha-jin. He was the same age as Ho Min. The monarch hoped that they would become friends as senior and junior subordinates. The monarch then introduced Ha-jin to Baek Homin. She asked Ha-jin to teach her colleague the basics needed to be a hunter-ruler. Ha-jin asked if he really needed to do this again. Obviously, he didn't really want to. The monarch told Ho Min that Kong Ha-jin had been working for her for 2 years, and that Ho Min could learn a lot from him. Ho Min looked at him warily. The boy had been working as the monarch's hunter for 2 years, which meant that he had become a hunter when he was a teenager. Ho Ming thought that he would be the youngest here. The monarch again reminded the 2 boys that they should become comrades. Ho Ming saw no reason to be hostile to his new friend. He introduced himself and extended his hand to the other man. But the guy turned his head to the left and ignored him. Baek Homin was not happy about this and told Monarch that Ha-jin probably didn't like him. But Monarch assured him that he was just shy. But Baek Homin didn't believe it. Ha-jin's face said that he had no intention of communicating with Ho Min. Ho Min was a little annoyed. The monarch said that one way or another, Ha-jin would tell him all the details, and that since Ho Min was still weak, he would need to train. Ho Min asked if he was really weak. The monarch confirmed and ordered him to show what he was worth by becoming stronger. The monarch needed to see that the boy was capable of following orders. Ha-jin began to lead Ho Min around the palace. Ho Min asked where they were going, but Ha-jin didn't tell him. Ho Min asked if all of the ruler's hunters were so rude. Ha-jin didn't even greet him properly. Ha-jin turned toward Ho Min and looked at him sternly. It was as if he was drilling Ho Min with his eyes. Ho Min thought he had touched a nerve. Ha-jin pointed to the door to his left. He said that Ho Min would be here now. They entered the room, and Ho Min immediately realized that this was his new home. there were 2 beds in the room. Hajin noticed that his companion liked it. Of course, it was a warm and clean room, and the blanket was incredibly fluffy. Hajin said he had heard that Homin had received a platinum plating from the monarch. Homin confirmed this, and asked what was wrong with it. Hajin lifted up his headband. Underneath it, he could also see the eye with the seal on it. He advised Homin not to fool himself into thinking it was some kind of great gift, like the idiots who had come to the palace before him. Of course, Homin knew that a seal could be on any part of the body, but it was very strange to see it on the socket of an eye. Hajin changed the subject to another. He said that a platinum coin was worth 10 gold coins. Homin did not understand what he was saying. Hajin said that it was just a convention. Gold and platinum have the same purity and weight. Baek Homin still didn't understand. You can mine gold in the tower, but you can't make platinum. Only the monarch can create it. That is why platinum is not distributed and is only used for symbolic purposes. It can also be used as a catalyst in rare alchemy, so its price is higher than gold. Homing understood why platinum was 10 times more expensive. Some people have always wanted something extravagant. If platinum is really a symbol of a monarch, then there will be people who will use this metal for their authority. Hajin said that 3 platinum coins were used for the Homin seal. Another coin was also used to buy medicine from the alchemist's guild. Good medicine is expensive. Homing thought, if he could only earn 1 gold coin in 10 years, he was now 400 years in debt. Homing said that he did not ask for this. Should he really have to pay for it? Hajin said that the monarch would not ask for money for this as long as Homin was her hunter. Homin tensely asked what would happen if he stopped being the ruler's hunter. Hajin said that the platinum monarch would take his kidneys, bile, spine, cornea, stomach, blood, hair, skin, bones, and heart. She will exchange every gram of his body for platinum. Homing was wary. He had seen this process before. One accident, and Homin will turn into Hyunsu or other criminals. Hajin continued. He said there was no point in hiding his abilities. Baek Homin should do his best to prove his worth. In addition, by the order of the monarch, Hajin will be at his side 24 hours a day. Hajin's report will decide Homin's fate. Death or pardon. 24 hours a day. Homin realized why there were 2 beds in the room. He didn't like the prospect of sharing a bed with his warden. The Constellations started a dialogue about Kong Hajin. Each of the siblings had met him during his lifetime. The warrior king noted that despite the fact that the guy was paranoid, he was also a reliable friend to him. The king asked the other sovereigns what they thought of the boy. The others were not thrilled with him. The only one called Hajin a stalker and a pervert, and Dynamite said that the guy was constantly exploiting him for his own purposes. The only one said he wasn't worried about Kong Hajin and the structural changes in the tower that had never happened before. Dynamite agreed that it was an unusual phenomenon. The one had only one explanation for this, and that was the 3 of them. Baek Homin created a starry sky to demonstrate his theory to his comrades. Usually, the stars looked like scattered little specks in the sky, but now they were clustered together in groups. The constellations immediately recognized their star signs. They were disappearing from this world through rebirth, but their star signs remained. Dynamite understood why people were shocked to see constellations that did not exist. The warlike king noticed Dynamite's 8 stars. Dynamite, in turn, noticed the warrior king's 7 stars. Dynamite knew these stars because he had watched the king's life. Then the king switched to a bunch of stars that looked like a huge flock of fireflies. He assumed that this was a sign from the One. The One confirmed the assumption. The king was amazed. He could not even count the number of stars that had gathered. He had never thought that such a thing was possible. The Dynamite said that if their star signs were the cause of the changes, it would be impossible to count the events that followed. the only one agreed. But if the monarch trusted Ha-jin to watch Baek Ho-min, the boy would soon get his first job. Dynamite added that when the monarch finds someone with potential, she thoroughly tests that person for strength. Ho-min will have a hard time. In addition, the one noticed that in this life, Kong Ha-jin is determined to get rid of Baek Ho-min, and the screaming doll wants to execute him. The monarch will test Ho-min until he proves himself. The warrior king realized that they were all very unlucky. There is no telling what awaits them. After a while, the monarch's men were able to solve the security problem up to the 4th floor. Ho-min and Ha-jin walked up the tower. Ho-min was dressed as a government hunter. He did not like the clothes, they were not comfortable. Ha-jin said that he should wear it properly. As long as Ho-min is wearing this uniform, he represents the monarch himself. Ha-jin investigated how the structural changes had affected the lower floors over the past 6 months and found an area that had undergone minor changes. Then, predicting that the changes on the floors starting from the 5th floor were more severe, he returned to the palace. Ho-min asked why Ha-jin was back so early. The boy replied that his mentor had decided to go up to the 20th floor, and Ha-jin had returned to report that the elevators to the 4th floor might be open. Ha-jin said that they would now explore the 5th floor. Baek Ho-min pointed out that in that case, they would only be able to turn back once they reached the 10th floor. Ho-min didn't want to walk 5 floors with this weirdo. But Ha-jin ignored him again and told him to follow him. Ho-min thought that he had to hold on. Ha-jin is certainly not the nicest guy, but if they can become friends, it will be much easier. The two boys came to a cave with a mine inside. Ha-jin said that there was an elevator hidden somewhere and climbed into the trolley. This elevator was not available for public use. With the help of this elevator, they could get to the 7th floor. Ho-min said that the trolley and the cave were too small, but Ha-jin didn't listen to him again because he was busy doing his own thing. He was holding a coin and a knife. Very carefully, he cut off some gold from the coin, and it fell on the magic circle in front of the trolley. The circle immediately activated, and the boys irrigated from the spot. During the journey, Ho-min asked Ha-jin about the safety of this path and his confidence in where it would lead. But Ha-jin said that he had no idea where this elevator was going. The reason why it is inaccessible to the public is because he does not know the final point of the route. The ruler's hunters have used it many times, and if something goes wrong, it's because of structural changes in the tower. The trolley suddenly stopped. Baek Ho-min panicked a bit and looked down while Ha-jin remained calm. The reason for the stop was a malfunction of the rails. They were torn into 2 parts. But Ha-jin remained gravely calm. He said that the structural changes had taken place here, and therefore their work was about to begin. Baek Ho-min agreed, but suddenly heard a strange noise. Ha-jin said that it was just a little trouble. The noise was coming from a flock of giant cave beetles heading toward them. Baek Ho-min dropped the magic lamp, and the boys grabbed their weapons. Ha-jin said that they were lucky to be on the lower floors, and ordered Baek Ho-min to hold on. Baek Ho-min cut the bug in half. Ha-jin held a knife in each hand. Ho-min pierced another beetle with the knife. But there were too many of them. During the fight, Ha-jin was in no hurry to help Baek Ho-min, preferring to observe. He was waiting for the skill to be used. Baek Ho-min launched furious attacks on the enemy. After a while, they managed to slaughter all the bugs. For Baek Ho-min, the picture was not the most pleasant, and he felt a little sick from the amount of slime. Ha-jin asked him why he didn't use his skill. Ho-min said that it wasn't necessary. Ha-jin objected. If you receive the patronage of a constellation, you have to use it. Ha-jin said that you shouldn't hide your skills until you die. But Baek Ho-min replied that every time he activated the skill, his seal started to heat up. He didn't want to risk his hand every time. Ha-jin then lunged toward Baek Ho-min. He took him by the head and pushed him to the ground. Homan started yelling at the other man. His actions were unacceptable. Ha-jin said that he was watching Homan's battle with the vermin. The guy fought so recklessly, as if he had a couple more lives behind him. The monarch may have liked such courage, but Kong Ha-jin did not. Baek Homan aggressively asked him to remove his hand from his head. Ha-jin told him that the average lifespan of a government hunter is less than a year. He asked Baek Homan if he understood what that meant. Everyone except Ha-jin's mentor and himself either left, was killed, or was expelled from the palace within a year. In 2 years, Ha-jin buried more than 5 hunters who came after him. One of his students was a parasite, and the other was eaten by this parasite because he did not dare to kill his friend. Ha-jin had seen enough of people who died hiding their skills. He aggressively emphasized that skilled hunters do not die by tripping over a rock or from the common flu. They all fall victim to parasites. Baek Homan could not argue with this fact. The prey kills the hunter. Blacksmiths die because they are overconfident in their work. And alchemists die because of their greed. This is obvious. But after spending most of his life on the streets, Baek Homan also learned one thing. Most people die because of other people's greed. That's why he can't just trust others. It doesn't matter if it's Ha-jin or the Platinum Monarch. He cannot carelessly show off his skills or talk about constellations. The warrior king pointed out that even though Kong Ha-jin is not trustworthy right now, Homan is hiding a lot. But the one disagreed. It was better to let Baek Homan keep quiet about his connection to the constellations for as long as possible. Dynamite agreed, especially when it comes to Kong Ha-jin. For the past lives of memory skills, this is an incredible opportunity, but for the others, it's something frantic and unacceptable. If Homan talks about his memories that he couldn't possibly have, people will definitely start to suspect something. The king asked what exactly they would suspect. Dynamite replied that people shouldn't know that Baek Homan can be reborn. But the king said that maybe it was for the best. The boy would become famous and gain strong allies. Dynamite explained that the problem is the monarch. If she finds out about this ability and is not satisfied with the result, she will just start all over again. The king realized that the monarch could kill Baek Homan. Even though he didn't like this fact, the Platinum Monarch was a genius. She had learned many times that Baek Homan could be reborn. The only thing he didn't want to do was mess with her. If the monarch found out about the rebirth skill, she would try to kidnap him or use Baek Homan for her own purposes. The current Baek Homan doesn't know this, so he's probably instinctively hiding his skills to stay alive no matter what. Baek Homan's head was pinned to the ground by Ha-jin's hand. Ha-jin threatened to continue to force Baek Homan to use the skill. In his opinion, Baek Homan would not live more than a year if he continued to hide his skills. Homan objected and said that he had always respected the work of hunters and did everything for survival. He would definitely get out and climb to the top of the tower, using the skill as he wanted. Homan's words began to make Ha-jin furious. Ha-jin told the boy that he was a weakling and should not be the ruler's hunter. Homan was surprised that Ha-jin was going to inform the grafters and pay Homan's debt to leave the palace and the tower. Homan broke free of his hold and aggressively told Ha-jin that he was talking nonsense. Homan is fighting for his precious life, and Ha-jin is just getting in the way. Enraged, Ha-jin hit Baek Homan with his left hand in retaliation. But Homan dodged and kicked Ha-jin in the legs, lifting him off the ground. Ha-jin was furious. Baek Homan had rebelled against his mentor, and now Ha-jin had every reason to throw him out. Ha-jin bent his right hand behind his back, gripping Baek Homan's head. At that time, Homan noticed that there was a gap behind Ha-jin's back due to the structural changes and told him about it. But Ha-jin didn't believe him and fell backwards with Homan. Then both of them flew into the abyss. They fell to the lower level of the cave, where there were strange carved columns. Neither of them realized where they were. Ha-jin blamed his subordinate for this failure. Every time he takes someone as a student, everything goes wrong. Ha-jin could not believe that he would meet his death here. Baek Ho-min, on the other hand, was sure that Ha-jin was to blame for starting the fight. Ha-jin explained that they had most likely fallen into the foundation or basement of the tower. But they were on the 4th floor. Baek Ho-min still didn't understand. Ha-jin explained that the foundation consists of areas where light cannot reach, also called basements or dungeons. Ho-min remembered that the Scarecrow doll had asked him about visiting the foundation. Baek Ho-min had a feeling of moss growing on his body. Ha-jin explained that they shouldn't stay here for too long. Otherwise, both of them would become parasites. Ho-min was shocked. He was the only one who called the dungeon a place of testing. It was here, he said, that humanity killed the 10th floor guardian 36 years ago. The structure of the place has changed, but even the one did not expect such serious changes. The one had been here once before. He was digging through the foundation to find traces of past constellations. The foundation looked like the annual ring of a tower. It had traces of past trials, parasites, and disasters. The more severe the incident, the better the trace is visible. If Ha-jin and Ho-min didn't get out of there, they would face the very first test of humanity alone. Ho-min pretended to feel uncomfortable from the excessive moisture, but he could not relax if he did not want to remain human. Ho-min asked why he should wander around the bottom of the tower if he could just climb the mountain. But it wasn't that simple. The boys were in the elevator area. The elevators are like wormholes in the tower. If you go upstairs, you don't know where you will end up. Ho-min asked what a wormhole was. Ha-jin was surprised by such a stupid question. But he answered Ho-min simply. They'll get lost if they cut back. They had to speed up to avoid becoming parasites. But that wasn't so important to Ho-min right now. He was more interested in why Ha-jin should pay the monarch his debt, and why Ha-jin was so eager for him to leave the palace. Ha-jin didn't say anything. Then Ho-min joked about Kong Ha-jin's crush on him, and he immediately got angry. After that, Ho-min asked Ha-jin again why. Ha-jin said that he was not interested in money. He was satisfied that his strength was up to the ruler's standards. If the ruler wants Ha-jin to become stronger, she will arrange it. Ho-min asks if the monarch really likes Ha-jin as a woman. Ha-jin was immediately ashamed and angry. But Ho-min pointed out that he wasn't denying that he was in love. Ha-jin said that the ruler saved his life, and he was trying to repay her. Ho-min pretended to believe him. But it was obvious. Ha-jin liked the monarch. That's why he was afraid of Baek Ho-min and his blessed consort. Ha-jin didn't like the way that Ha-min was staring at him so intently. Ho-min offered Ha-jin advice on how to improve his relationship with the monarch. Ha-jin was interested. Baek Ho-min said that the monarch was interested in him, and he could use that to praise Ha-jin to her. The monarch, in turn, would say that Ho-min was a skillful rookie. In this way, Ho-min will prove his worth as a hunter, and Ha-jin will succeed in matters of love. Ho-min thought that his interlocutor was already hooked. But without giving any answer, Ha-jin showed a huge glowing hole in the wall. Baek Ho-min wondered if this was an exit. But it didn't look like one to him. To Ha-jin, it looked more like a starlight. He did not understand what exactly this hole was, but he instinctively felt its connection to the constellations. Most likely, this was also the result of structural changes. They went inside the hole, hoping that it would help in their research. Inside was a sword with a golden hilt. The sensation of growing moss disappeared because of the sword's aura, but Baek Ho-min did not understand what kind of weapon it was, and why it was stuck in the ash mirror. Ha-jin suggested that this place was connected to the guardian of a certain floor. These were very powerful monsters that prevented every 10th floor from going higher. They were one of the obstacles to the top. But if you overcome this obstacle once, a barrier appears below, preventing the creatures from going higher. In other words, the territory captured by the guardian is transferred to the possession of humans. It is very difficult to break or kill them, but still possible. But in order to turn the Guardian's territory into the true territory of people, one still has to pass the test. This sword looked like the object of a hunter who had defeated the 10th floor Guardian. Baek Homin shouldn't have touched it, but he seemed to be drawn to it. He sent the boy a like. Homin asked if he could touch the sword. The only one sent another like in response. Baek Homin smiled, saying that he understood his attraction to the sword. Ha-jin couldn't understand why his ward was talking to himself. But Homin had already grabbed the sword. At the same moment, the sword began to crack and shattered into pieces, ending 19. The sword broke into small pieces. Ha-jin was angry at what Homin had done. Homin did not understand why the other one had told him to take the sword. But there was no time to think. Homin noticed a bunch of other selves and a bunch of other Ha-jins. They were identically dressed and equipped. Suddenly, one of the clones attacked Ho-ming with the most soulless eyes possible. Homin dodged and attacked back. After a successful attack, the clone shattered into small crystal pieces. It was a mirror image. Homin was trapped. Ha-jin knew that the 10th floor Guardian, Mirror Butterfly, had this ability. A defeated parasite that remained only on the pages of history books. The previous Constellations had a hard time because of her abilities. Ha-jin continued to cut his copies. Baek Homin was afraid that his partners might get confused by the illusions and stab each other. But Ha-jin explained that this is impossible if you only fight your own reflections. Homin realized that this was a brilliant tactical solution. Ha-jin also said that you need to know the main body and apply the skill. He noticed that the bodies of all the clones were pierced by energy lines that converged to one point. Ha-jin began to break through there. More than 30 years have passed since the butterfly was defeated. During this time, the skills of the average hunter have improved. This test was overcome in much more difficult times than now. Ha-jin smashed more than 5 clones in one fell swoop, and broke through to the butterfly's location, after which it appeared in front of her eyes. It spread its mirrored wings. Ha-jin, on the other hand, could see the location of her heart in his yarga. He lunged at the enemy, but Butterfly easily dodged him. Ha-jin realized that he could not pierce the Guardian's heart in such darkness. A mirror wing suddenly appeared in front of his face. Ha-jin covered himself with his knife hand, and then fell to his knees. The butterfly continued to shine into Ha-jin's eyes through the wings. The light gave him a vital sense of balance. Moreover, the butterfly did not finish him off, but turned around and headed toward Baek Homin. Ha-jin was saddened by the fact that Baek Homin was a bigger threat to the butterfly than he was. Immediately, Ha-jin made another lunge at the Guardian to make him regret his decision. Meanwhile, the clones drove Baek Homin into a stalemate. He tried to fight back, but it was difficult. His face was covered in cuts that bled. Homin tried to calm Ha-jin to make sure he was alive. Ha-jin flew into a pile of clones, cutting them open. He replied that Baek Homin was the one to worry about here. There was no end to the reflections. The partners needed a new strategy. Ha-jin explained that they had to kill the butterfly because the clones were his work. He was still angry that Baek Homin had allowed himself to touch the sword. Homin apologized. He had taken it because of the one who had sent him a like. It was a misunderstanding. Ha-jin noticed that Homin was holding himself much better. But Homin still couldn't see the butterfly. Ha-jin explained that the butterfly distorts the sense of balance with its reflection. You can't look at it. Homin asked how this creature was defeated in the past. Back then, there was a constellation of the devastating dawn called Ripples. It wasn't a constellation yet, and it found an opportunity to pass the test after losing 2 comrades. Ho-ming said that he should have used her strategy right away. But in the past, the ripple filled the entire space with light and broke all the reflections. Ha-jin realized that none of them had that ability. Only those hunters who have received her blessing can use her skills. As a last resort, you need a blessed item. And then Ha-jin remembered the sword and told Baek Homin to find it. Homin said it would be a bit difficult in this situation, but there was no way out. Asking Hajin to cover him, he rushed into the battle in search of the sword. When the one saw Hajin and Homin working together, he calmed down. The king didn't understand why the one would force Homin to activate the test if there was no reward for completing it again. But the one didn't care about rewards. He wanted Homin and Hajin to cooperate in the battle against strong opponents. There would be many more monsters waiting for them at the top of the tower. The king still didn't like the risk that the one had deliberately taken. But in addition to cooperation, they could also receive the blessing of the constellation of ripples. It was quite generous. Meanwhile, Baek Homin found a sword handle with a completely broken blade. He asked Hajin how it was supposed to help them. Hajin told him that the butterfly was circling around Baek Homin and he needed to wait for the signal. Homin was in a difficult situation. Only a small part of the sword was left, and even if he used the 10,000 sword master, he wouldn't be sure of enough light. The butterfly went behind his back. Hajin informed his partner and told him to beat it for 10 hours. Baek Homin turned around and started swinging, but still couldn't see his opponent. Suddenly, a mirrored wing appeared in front of his eyes. He immediately lost his balance as soon as he noticed it. Hajin had warned him about this. Homin got to his feet. He did not like this feeling. The butterfly had disappeared again. The situation was complicated. Kong Hajin couldn't use the right sword, and Baek Homin couldn't see the butterfly. Homin had a plan. He told Hajin to look at him, hoping to use his ability to see and use it to find the butterfly. Finding it with just a glance wouldn't be easy, but even if Homin couldn't, the warrior king would. He activated his memory. But everything went wrong. Instead of the king, the one was summoned. Both Homin and the constellation were surprised and unprepared for this. Homin panicked. He needed to use the master of swords along with his king's instincts. But the one only smiled. His time had finally come. He lifted Baek Homin's arm with his own hand. The boy couldn't understand what was happening. Ending 20. Some unknown voice said that the butterfly was not even a test for him. The voice didn't understand why the previous ones couldn't overcome it. Baek Homin heard him. He immediately assumed it was the voice of the one. But the voice did not stop. He told Baek Homin that the first step is always difficult, but following the trodden path is easy. Baek Homin could not understand whose voice it was. Could it be the voice of the Platinum Monarch? Meanwhile, Hajin couldn't understand what was happening and how Baek Homin had paralyzed him when he used the skill. Hajin realized that Baek Homin was controlling his seal. There was a butterfly behind the two of them. He, too, could not move from Homin's skill. Hajin was afraid of such a skill. Homin explained that he used Hajin's eye to catch the butterfly. When it distorts someone's vision, it can't move if someone moves towards it. It can only move in the dark, being invisible. That's why the constellation Briz filled the whole space with light to win. But the one was not like that. He did not like the beaten path. To hell with these paths. How else can you catch an insect if you don't squash it with a fly swatter? Homin was shocked by the situation. His body did not obey him. He squeezed his two fingers together, and the butterfly's stomach tore open. The insect screamed with incredible force. Hajin could not believe his eyes. But his time with the one was over. He was replaced by the warrior king. Their lives had changed. Homin felt that it was time to attack, so he ordered Kong Hajin to keep his eyes on the butterfly for control. Hajin got a little lost in the situation. But the butterfly had to be killed before it could escape. The master of 10,000 swords was activated, and the golden weapon glowed again. Baek Homin struck the decisive blow. The butterfly screamed in incredible pain and began to crumble into pieces. The amount of light in the room was increasing. A few seconds later, it hit Baek Homin himself. After that, he woke up in the room with the whole sword. Opening his eyes, he did not believe at first that the fight had really happened. But if it wasn't a dream, then where did everything go? Suddenly, Ho Ming realized that the place had returned to its original state after their victory. A strange picture appeared in front of Ho Ming. The sword of ripples began to glow, and he saw her silhouette. He recognized her. She smiled and raised her thumb up, and the game window said that Baek Ho Min had received the blessing of the Ripple Constellation. Baek Ho Min was surprised by this event. The blessing was called Light. It allowed the wielder of a weapon to use starlight while absorbing its strength. Baek Ho Min was grateful for it, but he thought it was a very simple ability compared to the blessings given to other hunters. But he was still happy. He no longer needed the magic lamp. Baek Ho Min was incredibly happy because of his first blessing and wanted to thank the constellation. But before he could say anything, it disappeared. The one said alike. If the one said alike, it meant that the blessing was good. But what exactly did he hear after the skill was activated? Did it mean that the one had been here once, and moreover, had been here with the Platinum Monarch? If that was true, then she might know something. But it was still strange that no one had heard of such a powerful constellation. The only one who had instantly taken control of Kong Hajin's seal and caught the butterfly. Baek Ho Min realized what the foundation of the tower was. If stories are created on the surface, they are repeated in the cavernous world. He understood why a person could become a parasite in such a place. Baek Ho Min decided to check the synchronization rate. As expected, the synchronization with the one soared to almost 100%. This time, the level was going to go up. And then Baek Ho Min remembered Kong Hajin. The boy tried his best not to show him his skills. But still, Hajin saw him. Baek Ho Min touched his seal. It would not be surprising if Hajin wanted to kill Baek Ho Min after that. But he just ran away. Baek Ho Min walked out of the crack. As soon as he left that place, the feeling of the growing moss returned. He decided to use the blessing of the ripples on his cheapest knife, so as not to break the more useful ones. Ned shone and the space around him became perfectly visible. The strange feeling of moss disappeared. It was because it was not an unusual light, but starlight. In other words, it would not turn into a parasite. So I could safely wander around the tower's foundation. The ability wasn't as bad as Ho Ming had originally thought. It was clear why the one was pleased. Suddenly, a man's silhouette appeared behind Baek Ho Min. It was Kong Hajin, who called out to him. Baek Ho Min was a little startled by this surprise. Kong Hajin said that he had also received the blessing of the constellation. But the skill was different. Kong Hajin had received a night vision skill. It was handy, but the skill that defeated the butterfly was still better. So Hajin didn't run away, he just looked around. Hajin said that Breeze is a very generous constellation. And if she were alive, she would be a role model. Baek Ho Min was surprised to hear that Bridge had died, and said that he had just seen her. But Hajin was just as surprised. After all, Briaz had ascended 16 years ago. Ascended constellations can only whisper to the living through starlight. They cannot appear in front of people in their own form. Ho Ming did not know this. He said that Briaz was in a kind of dim light, but he really saw her. Hajin was silent at first, and then pretended not to believe him. He blamed it on the illusion of the mirrors. The team headed toward the rails that Hajin had found. Walking to the rails, Ho Min couldn't understand why Hajin was so calm. He thought his partner would kill him as soon as he saw him. But he didn't do anything. Meanwhile, Hajin himself wanted to talk about the battle. Ho Min got scared. But again, Hajin did nothing. He just thanked Ho Min for defeating Butterfly. Ho Min was surprised for a second, and then he was overjoyed. Kong Hajin had recognized him. Ho Min immediately asked his partner to repeat what he had said, but Hajin was embarrassed and asked Ho Min to shut up. 21 ending. When Ho Min and Hajin left the dungeon, they found themselves on the 9th floor, and when they reached the 10th floor, they immediately went back down. It took them only a week. The monarch who had received them for an audience was standing in the courtyard again, punishing the criminals. She asked them to begin their report. Ha-jin began the report on Baek Ho-min. Ho-min himself thought that working with Ha-jin was good, though not easy. Ha-jin gave the opposite opinion, saying that Baek Ho-min was not helpful. Baek Ho-min acts decisively and impulsively, and can get the group into a dangerous situation. Immediate punishment and confiscation of the platinum was the right thing to do, according to Ha-jin. Ho-min was angry at this characterization. The monarch asked Baek Ho-min for his opinion. After all, it was his first time in the tower as a hunter. He said that Ha-jin was no help at all, even though he was the senior hunter. Ha-jin got angry in response. The monarch was happy that the boys had become friends, but they denied it. The monarch allowed Ho-min to go inside and rest. He was glad to be able to sleep and take a shower. It turned out that Ha-jin's report was not important. The monarch had not placed him under observation to assess his character and command capabilities. Ha-jin repeated to the monarch that Ho-min did not belong here, and that he could forget the monarch's name. But the monarch didn't care. She couldn't let Ho-min be a stray dog. Ha-jin said that if the monarch kept him in the palace by force, Ho-min would escape, but if not, the executioner doll would leave him without a head. The monarch smiled slyly, and said not to worry about the executioner doll. This emotion meant that thoughts and plans were flowing through her mind. Next, the monarch asked Ha-jin about the structural changes. Ha-jin said that his teacher had gone up to the 20th floor. And looking at the information he left behind, he assumed that the cause was unknown constellations. Now they are looking for the cause of the constellations, which until now have not cared about anything but improving and maintaining the tower. The monarch said they should warn the guild master. Ha-jin also suggested that hunters under the auspices of the constellations that descended from Mount Constellation would show themselves. And also, strong parasites will appear. Ha-jin also told about the constellation Riaz, which most likely also came down from above. Riaz died when the monarch was 10 years old. Many people mourned her death. The monarch said that the constellations that appeared would be of no use to her successors. The upper echelon must remain on top. It would be better if they returned to the top instead of making things worse. The monarch returned to the topic of Baek Ho-min and asked what Ha-jin really thought. It was his first emotional report in all his time on the job. Ha-jin said that he was surprised by Baek Ho-min's skill and that he would be much stronger if he had a good teacher. The monarch replied that Ha-jin shouldn't worry because Baek Ho-min was being watched over by the constellations. Ha-jin reported to the monarch that he felt the presence of 2 constellations, but he could not understand who they were. The sudden appearance of the constellations, the deterioration of the tower, and the appearance of such a strange creature as Baek Ho-min. The monarch was sure that this was not just a coincidence. She left Kong Ha-jin in charge and let him go. There was one thing that Ha-jin was afraid to tell the monarch. In the dungeon, Ho-min was able to take control of his seal. And the way he controlled the seal was different from the way the monarch did. The question of who Baek Ho-min was never left Ha-jin's mind. Sometimes Baek Ho-min would look at himself in the mirror and rejoice at his healed wounds. And his body looked more muscular than before the mission. Most likely, it was from taking dynamite supplements. Suddenly Ho-min heard the door open and realized that Kong Ha-jin had returned. But Ho-min locked the door. But the attempts to open it from the outside continued. Angry, Ho-min went to the door and opened it. But it was not Ha-jin who stood in front of the door, but the Platinum Monarch herself. She smiled at Ho-min, who had just come out of the bath. He was embarrassed and started to cover himself. The monarch was going to wait, but she started to worry that the boy might drown. She could not have imagined that it would take him 2 hours to take a bath. Ho-min said he didn't often have the opportunity to take a bath. The monarch asked him to follow her when he was done. She wanted to reward him for the task. Baek Ho-min was immediately embarrassed. The monarch and the already dressed Ho-min went to her office, where she took his hand with the seal. She said that Baek Ho-min was very rough with his hands. Most hunters don't care much about holding up their seal. To maximize the effectiveness of your skills, you need to take care of your seal. Baek Ho-min was again embarrassed, but agreed with the monarch's statements. The tower system was not 100% perfect. And while a seal made of gold can be repaired, Baek Ho-min's seal was made of steel, so it had to be repaired manually every time. Baek Ho-min realized that the monarch of the Code Week would restore his seal. Also, as a reward for the task, the monarch was going to upgrade his seal with platinum. Ho-min was again surprised that the monarch was giving him expensive platinum. But it was nothing out of the ordinary, just a simple bodily enhancement. Because Ho-min treats his body roughly, the monarch makes his body even stronger. Baek Ho-min thanked him, and immediately felt his skin become tighter and firmer. He was overwhelmed with the feeling that he had become more enduring. If the monarch could dig into the seal, then there would be stronger improvements available to Ho-min. But the Constellations would not allow Baek Ho-min to do so. The monarch wanted the Constellations to understand her goodwill. But Baek Ho-min could not understand. He would become even stronger as a hunter. It seemed to have no downside, but he needed to tell the monarch everything about his Constellations. Suddenly Dynamite gave him a like. Ho-min got scared and told the Constellations to sit still at such a moment. The monarch, of course, heard this. Baek Ho-min said that it was not addressed to her, but he did not finish the sentence because he realized that it would expose him. But he had already exposed himself. If he wasn't addressing the monarch, then he was addressing his consorts. And if so, they could hear and understand Ho-min very well. Ho-min panicked. He pulled his own tongue. He received 3 more scoldings from his constellation. Ho-min could not understand what had happened. He had to think of something. He thanked the monarch for the offer and declined, saying that he did not want his seal to be taken apart piece by piece. The monarch asked why. Ho-min began to invent a reason, but the monarch interrupted him. Ho-min was a hunter, and the monarch was his boss. They had a common goal, to climb to the top of the tower for the sake of humanity. That's why Ho-min risked his life. Then why doesn't he want to tell me why? Ho-min was embarrassed and ashamed again. He did not know what to say. The monarch said that Ho-min was talented, so she wanted to help him develop. He should get a service that matches his skills from now on. To do this, the girl wanted to know his abilities and limits. Baek Ho-min didn't think she was lying. Why should he hide his abilities and suffer because of it? If he could win the monarch over, he would be under the protection of the most powerful man in the city. At the same time, the monarch also lacks reliable people who are strong and loyal at the same time. She would be happy if Ho-min joined her. But Ho-min said that it was hard for him to trust someone. He had never done it before in his life. The monarch realized that Baek Ho-min has no experience with someone he trusts. In this case, monarch decided to build trust by starting with something bigger. She asked Ho-min if he had any experience with women. Ho-min said he had none. The monarch said that they were similar in this respect. She suggested that they treat each other as romantic partners, at least until they build trust. Baek Ho-min was confused by this suggestion. Constellation also thought the girl was crazy. Dynamite believed in the boy. The monarch's reaction was different from her past lives. She had never shown such kindness to Baek Ho-min before. The only one who was sure that she was a tyrant did not believe her. But Dynamite thought it was possible to go the other way. In 22, each of their past lives had failed romantically. But this was their new hope for career advancement through a relationship. But the one believed that even if Ho-min and Monarch were to sleep or date, it was all nonsense to Monarch. Meanwhile, Baek Ho-min didn't know what to do. He had never been attracted to girls. He had girlfriends, but all his thoughts were on survival. There was no time for romance. He decided to ask for the advice of the Scarecrow doll. She asked why she should advise him. Ho-min replied that he didn't know anyone who would be better suited to the role of an advisor. But he had little choice. either Doll or Kong Hajin, who was unrequitedly in love with her. Baek Homin didn't want to die prematurely, so he asked Doll for advice. But being a knight meant holding back from unnecessary feelings. The executioner's Doll had much more experience in killing women than in dating them. But the girl had read many romantic novels, more than anyone else. So she thought she could give romantic advice. Besides, she liked to watch other people's relationships. The Doll agreed to help. Baek Homin immediately thanked her. The girl immediately told him to change his clothes. They went to a clothing store, where Baek Homin immediately put on a formal suit that made him look like a mafia man. The Doll immediately told him to take it off. The next outfit didn't fit either. Just when Homin thought they were going to get nowhere, the Doll approved his last outfit. Homing didn't even believe it at first. But in fact, the girl was also tired of shopping, and she wanted to kill Homin because of the tastelessness. They went to the cash register, where they were told the price of 270,000 won. It turned out that Homin hadn't brought any money with him, and was getting nervous. The Doll was surprised by this approach to the date. But the monarch told him not to bring anything because she was very wealthy. The Doll reluctantly paid for it. Baek Homin promised to return everything. The Doll said that if she saw a hero in a story who looked like Baek Homin, she would kill him right away, without hesitation. Leaving the store, Doll asked the boy where he would take the monarch. Homin said he wanted to take her to the city's back streets. Many people don't know their way around, but he knows some good places. The Doll did not like this. She thought that killing him on the spot would be a salvation for all the women in the world. And she was about to do it, but the monarch came to the meeting. Baek Homin noticed that she was a full hour early. When the monarch noticed the scarecrow Doll, she asked her what she was doing with her hunter. The Doll was embarrassed and could not explain the situation. The monarch said that she had an appointment with Baek Homin, so the Doll should save all her questions for later. After that, she took his hand and they walked away from Doll. Finally, Baek Homin thanked the executioner for his advice. The Doll was surprised that Homin was walking to meet the monarch. Walking through the crowded streets, Baek Homin wanted to address the monarch by her title, but she forbade him to do so. She asked him to call her by her first name, Yoon Soo-hyun. She also asked him to remove any words emphasizing her higher status. Homin asked Soo-hyun how she knew where he was. She replied with a smile that she had put a tracking device on his seal. Soo-hyun received information about all of Baek Homin's movements and actions. Homin smiled in response. He didn't like the news, especially when it was said with such a smile. Besides, they were having a rather strange date. The monarch was just dragging the guy along like a dog for a walk. She invited him to walk around the nooks and crannies, as he wanted. Homin agreed. Walking through the dangerous alleys, the young couple attracted the attention of all kinds of bandits. They looked at the girl, realizing that she was quite wealthy. Then, they started pulling out their weapons. Baek Homin noticed this, and immediately realized that the back alleys were not the best place to meet. He started to pull out his weapon. The bandits stopped, and then started running away. And the reason was not Homin. They saw something behind him. It turned out that the couple was being followed by the scarecrow doll, who was covering them. Homin was surprised that the doll was watching so obviously and conspicuously. Then Soo-hyun decided to take the guy to another place. It looked like he had no choice. 8 hours passed in this way. 8 hours of aimless walking around the city. Baek Homin was exhausted. He couldn't understand if this was a date. Even the pallid doll was getting bored. Suddenly Yoon Soo-hyun stopped. She said that something was wrong with the date, and that it was definitely not going well. She asked what Baek Homin thought, and if he felt his heart racing. He said that he did, but it wasn't the same excited heartbeat. The monarch said that if that was the case, the date was a bad one and suggested that they do something that would make their hearts beat faster. Homin immediately blushed. and they went to play thimbles. The monarch put another 100,000 won on one of the overturned glasses. Baek Homan stood there awkwardly watching. The host raised the glass chosen by Soo-hyun to the banal phrase about luck. But the glass was empty. This was Soo-hyun's 8th attempt. The girl was upset. She was sure of her answer. They lost 1 million won and Homan suggested that Soo-hyun leave. But the girl refused. She wanted to at least get back what she lost. Homan thought that the monarch had signs of gambling addiction. Meanwhile, the host was smiling insidiously and rejoicing that he had found such fools as this young couple. The next attempt was again unsuccessful. The host mocked the girl, saying that her eye could not follow the game. The host asked if she was still playing the game. Soo-hyun turned to Homan and said that today was a really bad day for a date. Homan tried to convince the monarch that they should drop everything and leave. The monarch reached into her bag and pulled out a coin. She still wanted to win back what she had lost. Homan, along with the host and the audience around them, was surprised. It was just a crazy decision. The host began to realize that something was wrong. Could it be that instead of the girl, he was the victim all along? The monarch ordered the host to begin. The man knew what would happen if he backed out of the game. He began to nervously stir the glasses on the table. The host thought that he could not break the rules of the nooks and crannies and leave everything as it was. But his hands, shaking with nerves, did not allow him to do his naughty tricks. He finished stirring the glasses and let Soo-hyun choose. Still, he thought he had a trick up his sleeve. Before choosing, Soo-hyun asked Homan if she made his heart beat faster. He confirmed it. The gold coin bet did the trick. Soo-hyun said that the show was over and pointed to the glass. The host was surprised. It was the wrong glass. He picked it up joyfully, thinking that the girl had become his victim after all. Homan was a little surprised. At first, he thought the girl was deliberately losing, but it seems not. Meanwhile, Soo-hyun's gaze became more aggressive. She said that this time she was also sure of the outcome. Then she put a whole pile of coins on the gambling table. No one had time to count them right away. The bank was growing too fast. Without changing her aggressive gaze, Soo-hyun offered to play one more time. The host was seriously scared. He thought the girl was crazy. Suddenly, the host was lifted from the gambling seat by a woman dressed in a fur coat. The host called her the boss, and then made room for her. Men in suits chased the audience out of the gambling room. The boss asked Soo-hyun who she was. The monarch realized that the woman had come to take all her cash. The boss said that Soo-hyun hadn't come here to spend the change she had in her pocket. So the reason was different, like to entertain the guy behind her. Suddenly, she recognized Homan. She shouted out to the whole room that Homan was the elder's killer. Homan was surprised that this elderly woman recognized him. She must have been one of the spider legs. Her thugs had already begun to pull out their weapons from their pockets. Baek Homan frowned as he realized that he had to fight. In 23, Baek Homan took out his sword and said that each attacker's head would be cut in two. Meanwhile, Soo-hyun took out a platinum coin from her pocket and offered to add it to the bank. The spider's leg was frightened when it recognized the monarch. The leg asked how the king had gotten here. Soo-hyun said that she was on a date. Meanwhile, the scarecrow doll burst into the cinema and put one of the guards on the floor. She was also immediately recognized. The doll threatened to kill anyone who tried to do anything. The woman asked if the monarch had been following her from the very beginning. But Soo-hyun smiled insidiously and said that she just wanted to get back what she had lost. The woman in the fur coat gritted her teeth. The monarch offered two options: to continue the game or to draw their swords. For the woman, the choice was obvious. She grabbed the glasses and began to rearrange them. Spider's Foot had been gambling for more than a decade. If Monarch was beaten by one of the amateurs, she could easily win. But suddenly the Monarch changed the conditions, saying that luck was not on her side today. She ordered that Baek Homin play. Homin was surprised to be asked to choose a cup. The woman knew that Homin grew up in a gangster's neighborhood, and it would be much harder to deceive him. Noga also offered to change the conditions. Namely, Homing had to mix the cups, and the woman had to guess the right one. If you can change the player, you can change the rules of the game. Homing may have seen the deception, but she was unlikely to have the experience to deceive the eyes of an experienced con artist. The monarch asked if Baek Homin would be satisfied with such conditions. He agreed and sat down at the table. Dynamite said that he liked the game from the moment it started. Homin hoped for a trick up his Constellation sleeve. He applied his skills and picked it. Dynamite had experience in gambling, and the increase in the indicator depends on its similarity. Homing began to stir the cups. The monarch continued to watch with satisfaction. Homin offered to choose a cup. The woman picked up the one she had chosen and lost. She wondered how the guy had done it, if it was all about his skill. Homing just smiled. He was not aware of the dynamite trick he had pulled off. Homie just carelessly rearranged the cups, made a sliding sound, faked a cough, and once touched the table a little. Spider Leg was furious, and continued to aggressively ask how Homing had managed to do this. Homin reminded her of one of the rules of the streets. If you don't know how you've been cheated, just shut up. Homing realized that Dynamite loves excitement and magic. The monarch recognized Homing's victory. Spider Leg realized that his days would be numbered if he was caught by the Platinum Monarch. She had to escape. She ordered her men to kill the monarch and the boy. Needles began to fly out of her body, hitting everyone around her, even her own people. Homing defended himself with his hands against the attack and then kicked the gambling table over. This sent the woman flying to the floor. Homin jumped over the table and pinned the woman's face with his hand, pinning her to the ground. Her men wanted to attack Baek Homin, but his killing stare and order to stay still stopped the thugs. Homin turned toward the ruler and asked if she was okay. The monarch stood unharmed. All the steel needles were melted, so she was not struck by any of them. As expected from a monarch. The monarch did not like the mess and suggested that they go to a quieter place. They climbed on the roof of one of the local buildings. The monarch asked the woman if she had said her name correctly. The woman said yes. The monarch kept his hands around the woman's neck and began to interrogate her. Recently, there has been an increased production of counterfeit money, incidents of violence, including the tower killings, and other offenses. It all looks like an attempt to turn the city upside down. The monarch asked the woman if this was treason. The woman panicked and said no. She explained that she was just trying to survive. The monarch said that she didn't care about the swindler's excuses, betrayal is always betrayal, and asked her again to tell the truth. The second question was whether there were any other traitors from the guild circle besides the counterfeiter, who was captured by Baek Homin back in the days of the Elder. The woman repeated that she did not know. She said that her job was to send bankrupt people to the spider, and she did not know which of them started working for him. The woman asked to remove the monarch's hand from her neck. The monarch said that it was of little use. So she asked the last question. As at that table, the cheater was able to win against the monarch 9 times. The woman was surprised by this question and said that there was just a small hole in the table. You just move a sheet on it, put a cup in it, and throw a coin out. The monarch did not let her finish. The girl thought the game was fair until the end. The woman and Baek Homin were amazed that the monarch did not pretend to be deceived. But there was no stopping the monarch. She began to read out the sentence to the swindler. The woman was scared and did not understand why she should be punished if she had answered all the questions. But Monarch did not promise to let her go alive. The woman was in a panic. And even if the monarch took pity on her, the woman would die from the scarecrow doll. Because she is a strict guardian of the law. Homin could only agree that the doll was a perfectionist. Realizing that she was not going to get out alive, the woman began to swear at Homin and said that the boy did not realize how crazy he was working for. In her opinion, the spider and its legs were just trying to survive. But Baek Homan replied that in that case, there was no need to start treasonous plots. The woman said that she hadn't tried, and that the monarch would sooner or later kill everyone in the city. In her opinion, the tower needed a new ruler as soon as possible, otherwise everyone would die. The woman said that the spider had proof of this, and that they were only trying to stop the inevitable. She continued to talk about the death of all people until she died. The lament doll was waiting for the couple downstairs. The monarch removed her hands from the con artist's body and complained about the noise she was making. But Ho Ming was wary. If what the spider leg said was true, was the city hiding some huge conspiracy? But the woman could not say that anymore. Ho Min stared at the tower that towered over the city with Su Hyun. The monarch said that it was time to rebuild the tower because it was midnight. She stood on the edge of the building and asked Ho Min to do the same. She pointed out the beauty of the local stars and then asked him again about a date. She took his hand and asked if she made his heart beat faster. Ho Min blushed furiously. The monarch smiled and offered to go to another one. Ho Ming looked at her with teary eyes and then agreed. Ho Min and the monarch returned to the palace, and Ho Min went straight to his room. Kong Ha-jin was waiting for him there. He sat on his bed and was silent. Ho Min realized that Ha-jin was unrequitedly in love with the monarch. But he also realized that the monarch liked him. He did not know how to tell his friend about this news. Ha-jin was already starting to get angry with Ho Min because the boy was just burning his face with his eyes. Ho Min was thinking about telling him about the situation, but he instantly had a better idea. Namely, to ask for the mission. He couldn't tell the truth. The next mission was on the 10th floor. The palace was informed that a high-level parasite had appeared on it. They had to check whether structural changes were involved. Ha-jin said that it could be a permanent change, so it was very important and they had to get together immediately. Ho Min asked if he and Ha-jin were working together again. Ha-jin confirmed it and added that he was tasked with looking after his partner. Ho Min was wary. Could it be that after their date, the monarch still doesn't trust him? He didn't think he would continue to be followed. Ho Min said that he couldn't trust anyone but his consort. Ha-jin started to hurry him up again, because they had to leave in an hour. There was a terrible stench on the 10th floor. Baek Ho Min almost threw up again. It seemed like he would never get used to it. Ha-jin laughed at his partner, even though he was holding a vomit bowl himself. A hunter approached them and asked if the monarch had sent them. He was from the Weapons Guild. Sir Jiamuk said he wanted to meet the boys personally. Ha-jin was surprised. It wasn't that important, but they went to the meeting anyway. Ho Min asked if Ha-jin had ever met Jiamuk. Ha-jin said to call him Sir Jiamuk. He was a man who commanded respect. He was a war hero and also belonged to the first generation of the Scissor. He was a war hero, the founder of the Hunters Association, in short, a living legend. Now he was the leader of the Weapons Guild, but in the past he was the one who paved the way on the front line through the tower. Now he is a hero who protects people from vermin. Ho Min thought it was strange why the guild leader wasn't involved in the guild and instead fighting vermin. Ha-jin said it was because of Jiamuk's incredibility. A long time ago, there was an organization called the Church of Eternity, and their leader was called the Overlord. At that time, their evil influence was enormous. But only one Overlord had the right to speak to the tower. And the Constellations were not up to it either. When they were conquering the tower, they did not pay attention to the state of Seoul. The Lord put an end to the complaints of the people with his fierceness. But one day a new ruler suddenly appeared. She was only 17 years old, but with her appearance a civil war immediately broke out. People's discontent grew very strong, and those who sided with the girl and pushed her to revolution were the Alchemy Guild. Ho Min was surprised that the alchemists had the courage to do this. He knew them to be very greedy people. But Hajin explained that the hunters were driven by the fear of losing their profits. The church leader could revive his dead followers and also had the power to cure incurable diseases. For alchemists, he was a competitor. The Alchemy Guild supported the girl who unexpectedly became the ruler. Under her command, the revolution began to advance. And so the War of the Blue and the White began. And even in the middle of the war, the Church of Eternity retained its power. Moreover, the Hunters Association and the Paladins defended the church. It seemed that the church had already won, and the revolutionaries had dispersed and lost hope, but then the constellation Jiamuk returned from the tower. He is the founder of the Association of Hunters, one of the first generation of people who became constellations. At the time, Jiamuk gave up everything to invest his energy in conquering the tower. He even gave up his status as the leader of the association. But the hunters still respected him. When he returned from the tower, he chose the girl as the new ruler. The new prophet, who had just become a constellation, took her side. The war moved to a new stage. As soon as the constellations took the side of the ruler, the association also changed sides. The war was very bloody with heavy losses on both sides. It seemed that it would lead to the fall of the city. But then the Pallid Doll appeared on the front line with the heads of the Paladin leader and the higher-ups of the church. Thus, the Paladins became godless Paladins. Ho Ming smiled, saying that this was in the spirit of the doll. Thus, the Church of Eternity collapsed and a new ruler took the throne. After that, the Hunters Association split up and everyone went to their guilds. Ho Min said that the new ruler was obviously the Platinum Monarch. Ha Jin confirmed this. The Executioner doll put an end to the Blue-White Civil War. But if Jiamuk hadn't appeared, it wouldn't have happened. Therefore, despite the fact that the Platinum Monarch became the ruler, people still say that Jiamuk should have been the ruler. Ho Min understood. Sir Jiamuk fled the city to avoid another uprising. That's the kind of person he is. Anyway, Ha Jin had to explain one more thing. The 1st through 9th floors were connected by the first staircase, and the 10th through 19th by the second. The fact is that the concept of the tower is clearly divided into 10 floors. The base of the first staircase is the ruins underground and the forest above. And the base of the second is a battlefield. The warrior king smiled at the memories he was reminded of. He spent a lot of time on the second staircase. Dynamite was the opposite. The second staircase was disgusting to him. Around the 10th floor, the consumption of potions reaches its peak. The only one said that he skipped the second staircase and went straight to the third, so he couldn't understand it. This was his talent. But the only one knew what the geomancer thought about the second staircase. He called it a very lousy place and said that the higher you go, the worse it gets. When Baek Homan saw Jiamuk, he was surprised by his appearance. In his mind, Jiamuk was completely different. Sir Jiamuk asked Ha Jin what exactly was going on under the tower. Ha Jin assured him that it was nothing interesting. Jiamuk was aware of all the consequences of the recent structural changes, so he asked Ha Jin exactly what was going on. Ha Jin replied that the city was under the full control of the monarch. In response, the guy asked about the high-level parasite that had been found. Jiamuk said that they usually appear on the 17th floor, but this one was found on the 11th floor. He assured that his people could take care of it themselves, but he decided to report it first. But now there were 2 of the ruler's hunters. In addition, Sir Jiamuk was seeing Ho Min for the first time in his life. Ho Min introduced himself. But Jiamuk was not interested. He said that there was no point in memorizing the names of the ruler's hunters because they die quickly. Ho Min was angry. He told the geomancer that he himself looked like a walking corpse. But Ha Jin didn't let him finish. Ha Jin asked Jiamuk for permission to go to the site of the high-level parasite. Jiamuk asked if Ha Jin didn't trust his hunters. The boy replied that he did not. Structural changes were a problem throughout the tower. One of the structural changes that was noticed on the lower floors was related to the foundation. It was related to the Jerkle butterfly, its test, and the constellation of the ripples, which one. With the help of a celestial observatory, it was found that one of the constellations that came into motion was Briz. Therefore, most likely, the structures associated with it began their movement. Moreover, given that Briz has been shining incredibly brightly lately, this becomes an even more serious issue. So Ha-jin asked Jiamuk if there had been any problems in the mirror room on the 10th floor recently. Jiamuk thought about it, and then said that he didn't remember anything like that. Ha-jin said that the mirror room could be the reason for the security problems on the 10th floor. Jiamuk repeated to Ha-jin that there were no problems, and there couldn't be because he was here. Ha-jin looked at him suspiciously, and then apologized for what he said. Jiamuk didn't say a word. Homin also realized that the mirror room was connected to the butterfly. Jiamuk said that his hunter, Leo Inoiho, would give him more information, and then wished his partners good luck. Homin couldn't believe that this was the great hero. Ha-jin was angry with him, and asked him to shut up. Liao said that 11 was where they thought the change had happened. There was a hill with a broken flagpole. Upon hearing the news of the hunter's disappearance, the fortress sent several people. Ha-jin wondered if it was the flagpole. Liao explained that by fighting every day, the vermin try to raise the flag from the other side. There is only one broken flagpole, and the guild is not sure if the parasites know whose it is. Ho Ming pointed to the person on his right. He was pierced through with a sword. It was already a parasite. If there are no serious changes to the corpse, they are simply called dead. They have no common features. They are on the second staircase, and can move freely even with mortal wounds. But their brains are one with the brains of parasites. That is, after death, they become parasites. Homin asked why they weren't called zombies. Ha-jin said that if you want to kill a parasite, you either have to cut open its heart and get the gold, or bury it where the light of the stars won't reach it. Most of the parasites on the second staircase are people. Il-ho said they sent 3 headhunters and 20 soldiers to the mountain with a broken flagpole. If the high-level view appears, it should be taken care of. And he added that he did not see any point in the ruler wasting time on this. Ho Ming sensed something from the moment he arrived here. None of these people were happy to see them. Ha-jin became alert and pulled out his knives, and ordered Baek Homin to prepare for a fight. Homin didn't understand what they were talking about. The heroes were confronted by a whole pack of dead men, and a guy from the weapons guild was lying on the sand. He probably wouldn't last long. Il-ho ordered them to hurry. The army of death walkers rushed at the group in a crowd. Ha-jin told Homin not to lose his head. The dead were different from the parasites Homin had seen before. They wouldn't die even if you cut off their heads. Ha-jin stabbed one of the dead in the heart. Then he reached into the parasite's body with his hand and took out the gold. He had to do exactly that. It was the only way to kill them. Meanwhile, Homin tried to take the parasite's head off out of habit. He felt that they were nowhere near the strength of those on the first floor. It felt like Ho Ming was fighting with another person. He threw the headless parasite onto the PVC and punched it in the chest. Ho Min liked the amount of gold in them, but it was a problem to get it. From behind, Baek Homin was attacked by 2 more dead men. Fortunately, he had time to react and turned around and stabbed one of them in the stomach. The dead man growled right in the guy's face and was ready to bite him, but a knife with a rope flew into the parasite's head. It was Kong Ha-jin. He said that Homin was fighting the dead too aggressively. The guy was just wasting his energy on them, which was ineffective. Homin didn't understand what he was talking about. The guy asked Ha-jin how many dead people he had already killed. Surprisingly, Ha-jin had managed to kill 5, while Baek Homin had barely killed 1. During his speech, Ha-jin killed 2 more in quick bursts. Homin noticed that despite the small size of Ha-jin's knife, his partner was able to make holes in the dead the size of his fist. It was all about the stance with which Ha-jin was stabbing. He twisted his body. Ho-min activated his memory skill and summoned the warrior king. He had to quickly pierce the enemy and turn the blade inside him. Ho-min struck a super powerful punch and pierced the enemy with the right hole. The dead man roared one last time and then fell down and did not move. Ho-min was overjoyed at his success. Ha-jin was surprised at how quickly his partner learned the new attack. Ho-min said that if Ha-jin could do some kind of attack, so could he, and he countered with a perfect attack. Ha-jin immediately realized that it was the help of a constellation. The warrior king recognized that the technique Ho-min was using now was something he had learned from Kong Ha-jin in his past life. But even before the king's help, Baek Ho-min realized that he had to use the rotational force. He became stronger. But the one noticed that it takes a lot of time to fight the dead. If the group had brought a magician with them, it could have been over much faster. Dynamite said that an alchemist would have been nice too. But the warrior king did not agree with the usefulness of an alchemist. Dynamite was angry. The king did not want to humiliate Dynamite, but simply thought that Baek Ho-min could make medicine himself. But when Dynamite was still Baek Ho-min, someone told him the same thing. After being told that the alchemist was not needed on the expedition, Dynamite became very angry and did his best to show what an important being he was in the tower. In 6 months, Dynamite completely cleared the 11th through 13th floors of Vermin. After that, if hunters died there, they did not become parasites. Dynamite received its first star for this. The king noted that the complete cleansing of the vermin was not just a skill, it was a deed that was on the level of distorting the very structure of the tower. The Dynamite brightened up and said that he was being praised. But the only one rudely said that Dynamite was making a mockery of the skill of creating medicine. Despite the number of lives he had saved by creating medicine for the Platinum Monarch, the monarch was probably wary of Dynamite's abilities. She must have thought that if Dynamite's abilities were not used in the right way, both the city and the tower would be destroyed. That's why she made him work at a menial job until he became dumb. Dynamite was shocked by this conclusion. The one asked Dynamite to sit still and not interfere in Ho-min's affairs during this expedition. Their goal was not to exterminate the parasites. The goal was for Ho-min to dominate this tower, receiving applause along the way. Meanwhile, Ha-jin and Baek Ho-min finished clearing out the vermin near them. Il-ho ran over to the injured man from his guild. It turned out that it was one of the main hunters. The wounded man woke up. He asked me to give Jiamak an important message. But suddenly, he saw Kong Ha-jin, and his eyes were filled with blood. He started yelling at him and trying to get up. Il-ho told him not to move because of his wounds. The head hunter started shouting that Ha-jin had killed the whole group, and then finally started turning into a parasite. Ha-jin didn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, Baek Ho-min killed the wounded man. Ha-jin tried to stop Baek Ho-min, but it was too late. Ho-min had done the right thing. Ha-jin himself said that people become parasites and die on this floor. But that's not what Ha-jin meant. His friend was right next to him. It was very unethical to kill him like that. But Il-ho said through his ible that he was fine. Baek Ho-min asked why the wounded man had attacked Ha-jin if he owed him money. But Ha-jin said it wasn't funny. He didn't understand it himself. Il-ho's son said that they had to hurry because there might be serious problems on the mountain. The 3 of them went to the 11th floor. But it was too late. The group had turned into vermin, and their hearts had been cut out. Il-ho could not understand who had killed them all. But suddenly they heard a scream from behind them. It was a person who was still alive. They realized where the sound was coming from. The voice was calling for help. It was a girl who had been cornered by 2 vermin and was ready to launch a killing attack. But suddenly their hearts were pierced by accurate attacks. It was Ha-jin and Ho-min who came to the rescue. The dead fell down dead, and the hunters began to check on the girl. The girl fell to her knees and burst into tears. She thanked them for saving her life. Il-ho recognized her. She was Yu Il's student. She recognized him as well. Homin was surprised to see students coming to the second staircase. Ha-jin said that the students of the Weapons Guild train on the second staircase. Il-ho asked the student what happened to the others. She couldn't string words together. She just listed the dead, wounded, and missing comrades. Il-ho was nervous. He yelled at his student and ordered her to speak more clearly. She closed her eyes in fear. Baek Homin grabbed Il-ho by the crying and told him to calm down. The girl is scared right now, and you shouldn't push her. Hale calmed down a little bit. She found peace in Homin's eyes.